All right, we should be live now. So, welcome everybody to the Living Echoes podcast. I'm joined today with Ian. He runs the channel Early Christian Beliefs. So, bear with us here while we just make sure everything's working. And I'm going to share the link to on Facebook so people can try to find it over there. And then we're going to get started. So, Ian, while I am checking, just introduce yourself real quick and share with everybody whatever little background you want to share and why you started your channel Early Christian Beliefs.
Okay, my background is born and raised New Age hippie baby in Portland, Oregon, and grew up doing occult and neo-paganism, was involved in the Wiccan revival. That was in the late 80s and the 90s as a young man. Into other occult stuff, and I don't want to glorify any of that. By God's grace, I was saved out of it, and actually, pretty good Protestant story. I had a Bible that I thought was cool looking, and I sat down and started reading the Psalms and the Proverbs, and made a resolution that there was something in there that I'd never seen before. I was going to follow that, and I wound up actually doing occult stuff, and I don't want to glorify any of that. Being a conservative Mennonite for a while, and while I was there, I found out about the Church Fathers, got me to be an Anglican, and following the same principles, the principles of St. Vincent of Lorens, I was eventually compelled to accept the papacy by my study of the Fathers, and that led me to become a traditional Roman Catholic. And I have the channel because the Fathers and St. Vincent of Lorens' principle of what was everywhere, always and by all accepted in the church from the beginning is the Catholic faith, and that is what I will settle for, nothing less than.
Right. Well, we're in the same boat on that, so that's good. For anybody who doesn't know, Living Echoes was started because I read Pope Leo XIII's encyclical on the chief duty of Christian citizens, where he specifically implores anyone, including lay people, to defend the faith, even publicly, as long as they are not taking on themselves the role of like a bishop or a priest. They need to be living echoes of their masters, is what he said, which is where the title of the channel and the newsletter comes from. So the goal here is to spread the true Catholic faith that was given to the apostles by Christ, and to try to avoid and cut through all of the modernism and the lack of faith and all the confusion that has resulted in the last 200 years or so. So without further ado, the topics we wanted to get into tonight, which is my favorite issues, are the salvation issues, because they really are, they're the linchpin that holds everything together. And if you take it out, the faith is gone. There's no more religion. So modernism has done a great job trying to destroy that and pull that out so that people don't have a clue what it means. They don't know how to be saved. They don't know why it's important. So it's the big issue. So we're going to start with where Ian and I agree, and then potentially get into where we disagree and try to flesh through those disagreements a little bit. It's not a formal debate. It's just an open discussion. I don't anticipate having any issues with that, so everything should be fine. So starting with, what is salvation not? So I think Ian and I both agree, and I'll let you chime in, that someone who would claim that a pagan on an island who does not have any knowledge of the existence of Jesus Christ, that such a one could be saved in that state, which they usually call invincible ignorance. Ian and I both agree that such a person cannot be saved in that state. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
And I would bring up, to start with, St. Cyprian and St. Augustine, who are both very clear that a person in schism, and some of the schisms that they discussed, to me, seem like they would be less significant than the difference, say, between different set of contest groups today. We're talking a falling out between clergy over discipline in areas that hadn't been settled yet, and resulted in a split. And they would say that those people who held the faith probably very clearly that even if they were validly baptized, and even if they were martyred in that confession of faith, that they had no hope of salvation. So the conclusion I've had to come to is that, okay, if a validly baptized person who's martyred, who basically holds the same doctrine as the church, has no hope of salvation because they're in schism, then how can it possibly be that someone, say, were to posit invincible ignorance, baptism of desire, or heresy, which certainly have no hope? And I think we would also both agree that those are echoed many times throughout the church in various popes, right, councils, fathers, etc.
Right. I agree. And because the hope is, as long as you're alive, there is hope for you, but there's things you need to do. And so the main rejection of modernism today, as far as I can see, is the spirit of it's not fair that God requires anything of anybody to be saved. Like, that's really what's kind of at the root of all this. And it is totally subjective based on where people draw the line. So like the atheist will draw the line at, if God even requires me to believe he exists, that's unfair, because that's a violation of my freedom, my free will. I shouldn't have to do that. So that if God does that, he's evil. And then other people say, well, you can't be an atheist, but you could know that God exists by natural reason and just follow the natural law on the island as a pagan, for example. And that's enough, because if God requires explicit faith in himself as the Trinity in Christ, that's not fair. That's God being mean. That's God holding them to too high of a standard. And then the last one, where we'll get into later, is it's the same argument for water baptism. Well, they have to have faith, but if he requires water baptism, now he's mean and he's unfair and he's unjust. And I hear that all the time. And so I don't know if you watched my last live stream, I hope, but we went through that with that line of where people will say it's unjust is subjective. And so the goal we want to get to for today is, what is the divine revelation of Christ? Because that's all that matters. If Jesus said we need something, then we need it. If he didn't, if he told us we don't need it, then we don't. But another obfuscation, and then we'll get into it, is I've heard people say, well, Jesus doesn't mention baptism of desire or baptism of blood, but that doesn't mean they're not true. And so the counter is not, like, the argument in favor of baptism is not Jesus didn't teach baptism of blood or desire, therefore it's false. That's not the argument. The argument is that the positive teaching of Christ excludes anything other than water baptism. So that's my claim. So, because other people, well, he just didn't mention it. And then they try to say that because he didn't mention it, that means there's like wiggle room on that. So no, I'm not saying that it's false because he didn't mention it. I'm saying it's false because his actual positive teaching that he handed to the apostles doesn't allow for it. There's no room for it. So
I definitely understand that position.
Good. Some people don't like that.
I think you're familiar with, probably more so maybe even with Aquinas on this issue than I am. I've not.
A little bit. I've read him.
He's about 800 years after my area of focus. And just for full disclosure, I do not have any college. I'm just a blue collar guy with a book collection. That's it. So my opinion isn't worth a whole lot. If you it's just my opinion. But
you are a guy on the internet now, so what you say matters.
Yeah, I'm a guy on the internet. I have a YouTube channel, so that gives me credibility.
Yep.
But I believe he said something about that an angel could be sent to somebody, right?
Yes.
And I have heard it said that every person at their death will have an angel sent to them, and they can accept or reject the gospel at that time. Now, that seems like a bit of an extrapolation from what St. Thomas said. And
yeah, because I'm not aware of that exact claim.
He was saying that a person of goodwill who lives according to the dictates of conscience, that God will send them a person, or maybe even by some supernatural means, an angel or something. Yes. So therefore, I was told that every person at their death.
Right. That's where I'm not sure if they're following Aquinas or not. Because I don't know if Aquinas said everybody.
But I think that sort of thinking is very popular. I've also heard it said that if you question that a person who is invincibly ignorant of the gospel, if you question that they cannot be saved, that you're a heretic.
Yes.
And I think that mostly stems from the misinterpretation of Pope Pius IX, which he personally renounced multiple times in very clear terms, that he was misunderstood and misrepresented.
Yes.
But it's a very common and very popular view in traditional circles to say that stems from that teaching, and that, in fact, if you question it, you're a heretic. And furthermore, good-willed Catholics can't really even discuss the issue. It's closed.
Right. It's actually the opposite. Pius IX actually closed the discussion to anything other than one Lord, one faith, one baptism.
Yeah.
But then everybody wants to object to that. So the actual thing that he shut the door on was, we don't need to dig into all these complicated questions, because the faith says one Lord, one faith, one baptism. And a child can understand that. A lot of the discussions that end up happening around this issue are way above even some adults' heads. They can't make any sense of it. And my suspicion is that that's on purpose, because Satan lives in that confusion and that muddying of the waters. And even like you said, the angel thing with St. Thomas, there's a huge difference between saying that God will send an angel to a good-willed person and then assuming that everyone will get that. And then on top of that, assuming that even if they don't get that and they die in their error, they could still be saved anyway. Like, there's such a gap to get there. And most of the invincible ignorance people don't even believe what St. Thomas taught, like you just mentioned about, no, if they're of goodwill, God will send them a preacher or an angel, or he will give them divine inspiration to know what they need to know. And most of them won't accept that. Suddenly, St. Thomas is very fallible, and they don't accept him anymore. And then they want to say that he was wrong, or they want to dodge it because they don't want to admit he was wrong, but they don't believe that. And so that's a problematic thing that I'll point out, is if anyone who would take the invincible ignorance position, you can't stand on the backs of any of the saints or the doctors. They don't support.
And I think, and the invincible ignorance and the heretical also, the people that are validly baptized that are heretics. And I believe St. Thomas was very insistent that you had to believe in the incarnation and the Trinity, well as St. Alphonsus is the one that seems to get brought up a lot. Yep. He also, I believe, held that position.
He did.
So, and another statement that I have heard said is that it's not just going to be Catholics in heaven. And
right.
And I suppose that can come down to definition of terms, like, well, okay, Moses, probably never sang the Ave Maria, at least before he died, maybe singing it now. But I recently have been reviewing the Catechism of the Council of Trent. And if I understand it correctly, it's saying that the Catholic Church subsists of all the righteous who have died in the past, even before the gospel. So everyone who is in heaven, every person who is in heaven is incorporated into the church, if I'm understanding it correctly. And maybe I'm not. I've only been through it, the first part, a couple of times.
What was the source again?
The Catechism of the Council of Trent.
Oh, and that supposedly said that even like
the Old Testament period, it subsists of all the righteous who are saved, essentially.
Okay.
The
I
church
would need to read
suffering, the church
that quote.
militant, and the church
Yes.
triumphant. And the
Yes.
church triumphant includes those who, after Christ's resurrection, were set loose from Hades and brought up into the beatific vision.
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, yeah. If that's what it means, that's totally true. So,
so and again, I'm no expert on the Council of Trent. I just read it recently, that part, and actually didn't even read it. I listened to it on audio, so I did not read it. To be clear, I listened to it.
Or you listen to the Catechism or the actual Council?
The Catechism.
Okay, all right.
The Catechism, and that's what it was saying. So, in what sense then, if that is the case, then maybe that terminology could be cleaned up. And there's others that I think we've all heard that talk about people being saved in non-Christian religions.
Yes.
By the merits of the church.
Yes.
So wouldn't it be better, which I don't agree with that, but wouldn't it be more precise, at least according to the theology that I believe they're trying to put forward, to say that they are somehow made a Catholic, maybe in the sense that a validly baptized infant in the Eastern Orthodox Church is a Catholic and part of the church? But they don't even say that. They just say, no, these people are saved out of these pagan religions by the church.
Right, and that's definitely false. It is true if the infant, like in a Greek Orthodox chapel, is validly baptized, that infant is not a Greek Orthodox infant. It is a Catholic, because the baptism makes them a Catholic. The infant can't resist the faith at that point. So they will cease to be Catholic if they grow up a Greek Orthodox and embrace those heresies and those schisms, but they have to embrace that. But as a baby, it's not correct to even call them, like, we say it because of who their parents are, but in truth, if that baby is baptized validly, then they're not a Greek Orthodox baby. They're a Catholic who has Greek Orthodox parents.
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of times that gets muddied, but they're not really ever talking about that. They're talking about adults who are living in false religions, even sometimes like Islam. And they could be saved by the merits of the church, but not in the Catholic religion. And that's 100% false, totally heretical. Gregory XVI said in Mirari Vos that you can only be saved in the Catholic religion.
Yeah.
And that's
many people have said that. I mean, the two, and I'm not trying to, put Cyprian and Augustine up on a pedestal, but I recently moved, all my books are packed. And so those are the two I've got at the tip of my tongue. I know there are statements that even a validly baptized schismatic who is martyred cannot be saved.
Right. If they're martyred in their schism, they cannot be saved. And that goes back to St. Paul's teaching that if I have not charity, it profits me nothing. And a schismatic doesn't have the requisite charity, because schism is a sin against charity. So their martyrdom profits them nothing. And then same with like anyone who'd be in a false religion that has a valid baptism, like the Greek Orthodox, because they're schismatics, they're also heretics. They're not just a schismatic, but even if they were only a schismatic, which is very hard. Usually schismatics also have some kind of heresies going on, but it's technically possible to be a schismatic without being a heretic. And even if that was the case, they can't be saved in that state. And again, schism, for anybody who doesn't know, but most of the people listening to this probably do know, they're astute. That is when you separate yourself obstinately from the Roman pontiff or true Catholics who are in communion with the Roman pontiff. So if you obstinately will not have communion with a true Catholic without just cause, that is schism. And so that happens a lot today. A lot of the traditional groups are in schism with each other. They won't give people sacraments. The other people won't give them sacraments. And so there's a lot of that spirit out in the world right now, which is really kind of like a cold-hearted Jansenism that's been floating around for a long time, and which is like Calvinism, because Calvin actually read Jansen. Jansen was a little before Calvin, and some of his ideas echo some of Jansen's kind of cold-hearted, God is the God of laws and not the God of mercy. you're sort of predestined to be damned. Like there were inklings of that in Jansenism, and then Calvin took it to its extreme and denied free will. But yes, so those are muddy issues. You hear that all the time about the merits of the church save them, but they're not technically in the church, but they kind of are, but they're not because they're not baptized. They don't profess the faith. So you and I think agree that you can't be a Catholic unless you've been validly baptized. And then once you have the age of reason, you have to continue to profess the true faith, correct?
Yeah, and okay. Absolutely. And the reason, one of the reasons I've been wanting to get the Catechism of the Council of Trent and study it for a long time, but I had some time to listen to it, and you had discussed it in your last debate. And I thought, well, you know, that'd be interesting to listen to it.
Right.
And starting with, you know, basically all the fathers, but, you know, particularly here, Cyprian and Augustine, but all of them pretty much, as far as I can tell, all the way up to Trent, the Catechism of the Council of Trent says the exact same thing, that you have to be in the church and hold the faith.
Yes.
That is completely unnegotiable. Pope Pius XI said it. And so for me, that is, to me, is very disheartening that the common understanding is so far from that I meet just with, you know, people all the time that I talk with and interact with, whether online or in person. It's just, that is the concept. And I'd like to know, not that I'm going to, take a lot of time to study it out. I like to look at the earlier stuff, but when did this whole idea start? And also another thing I just would like to get out of the way before we start really talking about our differences is with this issue, some people will try to say, well, is it the same as the Novus Ordo? Is it the different as the Novus Ordo, to look at it this way? And I think there's a big difference, but a big similarity. And the big difference, of course, is that the Novus Ordo sees the merit in those individual faiths, that God's working through all the different faiths.
Right.
Whereas the traditional Catholic position is that the church saves people in all these different faiths.
Right, because the faiths themselves don't have any merit.
Right. That's their downside, but because they're a super nice guy, they get the baptism desired, or what have you, the invincible ignorance. Right. And but aside from the Novus Ordos who profess universal salvation, we'll exclude them from the conversation, the end result is basically the same. Is that you've got Protestants, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, all these different ones, and they're all going, you know, if they act whatever the bar is set at, then they get saved.
If they follow their conscience.
Yes.
Then they're fine.
And, you know, again, I'm just a layman with a book collection, but it does disturb me. And I'd like, you know, if anybody's on here, to please show me where that teaching comes from. Because what I found in a lot, particularly with the creation issue, is if you look in textbooks, manuals, etc., from the early 20th century, that they will just really throw out there, oh, well, the common opinion amongst Catholic scholars and doctors is that the meaning of the word day in Genesis can mean millions of years. That's the common meaning. Well, if you go back 100 years before that, nobody taught that, right? It's just brand new. Right. And these people are just using an appeal to authority and asserting that this is the common teaching. Now, I'm not quite as studied on this issue that we're discussing, but I would suppose a similar process may have happened. And I'd be curious to hear somebody who does know what happened in the 19th century, what happened in the 20th century, and name names and bring the receipts. I'd love to hear all about it. But that's kind of what I suspect happened.
Yeah, the basic thread is you have the Enlightenment, and where the Enlightenment's coming on the backs of Protestantism. So we are very inundated in America, especially with Protestantism, and so we're sort of numb how bad it really is. But Protestantism is truly wicked, and it completely destroyed all authority. All legitimate hierarchical authority was destroyed with Protestantism. So a lot of the Protestants today, if you watch like the culture war stuff, they're complaining about all these social problems in America, and they're utterly clueless to the fact that their religion is why we have this.
Mm-hmm.
They are demanding that we hold on to traditional morality. I'm like, well, you can't, because you cut off the head of the papacy, which according to Scripture is the one who holdeth back the Antichrist. So you cut him off and said, we're not going to listen to him anymore. And now you're upset that people say men can be women and women can be men, and we're going to have drag queen story hour, and you're mad at all that, which that's good. You should be mad at that, but you don't have a remedy because your religion is false. Your religion is sadly from Satan. And that's why all the enemies of Christ supported Protestantism, because they knew what a death blow it was going to be for Europe. And so the Enlightenment is born out of Protestantism, because if I can tell the Pope, I'm not listening to you, I can tell the Scriptures those are false. And then if I can say the Scripture's wrong, now I can invent my own theory about the age of the earth, days are longer, and I can come up with my science to prove a whole different worldview, because I don't need the Pope and I don't need Scripture anymore. So I've cut myself off from all of that historical antiquity. All of that wisdom of the ages passed down is all stupid, and I don't have to believe it anymore because they were all primitive anyway, right? And so then I can invent my own theory, and it's not new. All of this is rehashed paganism, rehashed Greek mystery religions. None of it's new at all.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's new because they put some new Renaissance spins on it. But then eventually you get to basically scientism, where so much has happened by the 20th century that Scripture's authority has been undermined so much, the papacy has been undermined so much, that men feel this inclination to pursue their own truth. And that is modernism. That's what we're dealing with. And so there's only two religions. You're either a Catholic or you're a modernist, because modernism is your own religion. You get to make it whatever you want it to be. So there's only two paths, which is why the question is, what did Christ reveal? Because if he revealed that it is a certain way, that doesn't change because God doesn't change. But if he didn't reveal it, or we can't know what it is, then everything's up for grabs. The whole religion is up for changing. That's why the Novus Ordo is a sea of change. There's no stability. There's no structure to anything anymore. And because there can't be. They have no foundation. But name names. I mean, we could throw some names out. Obviously, Martin Luther, people like Calvin, people like Copernicus, people like Galileo. You know, they would not ultimately submit to the authority of the church. And so they allowed their ideas to perpetuate. And then you get into the French Revolution period with the Enlightenment guys, and they reject almost everything. We tried to start a 10-day week because they knew the 7-day week was biblical. So anything
I hate the metric system.
Yeah, right. Anything that was connected to that, they wanted to get rid of that, and that didn't work. But that's where it is. And so we're in kind of the last stages of this dying religion of man that has proven to be totally inept. It can't solve any of the problems we have. It doesn't cure the heart, doesn't speak to the heart of man, because it's cut us off from God. So my contention, to bring it into what we wanted to get to, is if you get rid of baptism, this is what happens. Getting rid of the sacrament of baptism is the first step to modernism, because Jesus Christ told us, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be condemned. What that means for most people now is he who ordinarily believes and sometimes is baptized can be saved, but he who is not baptized and he who does not believe can also be saved. That's what it means now for everybody today.
Yeah, and I think that there's several issues that are on that level. The baptism's one. I think the sacred history is also a big one. You essentially, if you say that God intended Genesis to be understood only as an allegory, so that I could say I literally believe Genesis because I believe it to be an allegory.
Right.
then it reminds me of some of the stuff that St. Irenaeus argued against in the 2nd century, against people that were mischaracterizing in a radical way the Old Testament.
Right.
And I believe that the salvation and the baptism issue are on that level as well. I totally agree.
Well,
and there's probably others too.
Right, because think about it. If you attack a literal Genesis, what does that destroy?
The whole Bible.
But like specifically about salvation, what does it destroy?
Well, the Noah's Ark, the Ark of Salvation, yeah, and
go back all the way to the beginning. Yeah. Adam and Eve is not true.
Yeah.
If that was not an actual event where Adam sinned in the garden, then what do all men not have anymore?
Yeah. Original sin.
They don't have original sin, which means they don't need baptism and they don't need faith. Because why do we need those things? We need those things because of original sin.
Yes.
But if that's fake, if that's a myth, no different than the myths about Zeus, then man is not fallen. And this is what Satanism and the Masonic beliefs are. Man is the pinnacle of everything, and we're ascending ever higher to godhood. We don't need to be redeemed. So that's the rejection. And so that's why Satan goes after Genesis so hard. If you want to trigger people, tell them Genesis is literal and real. And they lose their minds. They can't handle it because it attacks all of their fundamental worldview. Because if original sin is true, they need a savior.
Well, I think it's interesting, though, how people who believe in, let's say, a regional flood, they reject the global flood because of scientists, right?
Right.
But the Ark of Salvation is tied to the global flood, right? Only those inside the ark are saved. But with a regional flood, that is not the case.
Exactly.
But if they also believe in invincible ignorance, then they're quite consistent, because all those people that weren't in the regional flood are the invincibly ignorant and need to be saved.
Yes.
And
because the flood didn't go there.
And then to bridge into the topic of baptism of desire, I think this is one thing that, you bring up a lot of really good questions I don't have answers for, good objections. And one of them is that I don't know if I've even heard you say it, but I've heard in discussions of this topic, you may have brought it up, that many times the baptism of desire is presented in such a way that the catechumen or the invincibly ignorant person is on a far better footing than an actual Catholic, because they're essentially once saved, always saved. And that also comes into questions that you've brought up that I think are very worth discussing, and I don't claim to have good answers to them, is what is the mechanism of baptism of desire? So if I'm a catechumen, and this is no person in particular, but I've heard stories and seen things myself, so I'm just going to make a scenario here. I'm a catechumen. I come into a good traditional church, and I'm real serious about becoming a Catholic. And I'll crawl through broken glass at this point. I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Right.
And about 5 or 6 lessons in, I get explained to me that, oh, hey, don't worry about it. You're fine. You're desiring baptism. And when you get baptized, all your sins will be washed away. And if you die before that time, well, you're saved because you've got baptism of desire. Oh, right. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to X, Y, and Z sins, at least until I get baptized then. Whereas before, said person was putting them away. And I'm not the only person that's ever seen this. I've heard the other stories. They're anecdotal, but they're also true. They're also true that people are literally having sincere contrition for their sins, and they are wanting to get baptized because that is the gateway that they have to get through to be saved.
Yes.
And now they're told no. Well, explain to me how that has helped that person. Now, if there is such a thing as baptism of desire, in a way, you've just inoculated them against it. They're no longer desiring it. They're fine. There's nothing to worry about it. You're fine. And
which is why, if you watch the Deuterocomical debate, he says baptism of desire only happens at death. Because they thought of that exact issue, that absurdity that you just pointed out would be what you just said. It's like, well, wait, now you kind of even took away his baptism of desire because now he thinks he's safe, but he's not, but he still got it. And then they don't know how to make sense of that. So now they just invoke, it only happens at death. And every time I ask them to prove where that comes from, they have nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing. Even the people who talked about baptism of desire never defined it as it only happens at death.
Can you hang on just a quick second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I apologize, everyone. I go at the front. Yeah, sorry. I kind of set my wife up for failure here. I had to bail it out. So, and that is something that I would like to, like I said, I was, doing some reviewing on this topic because, I think my video on baptism of blood spurred this, you initiating this.
And we had talked prior to that too.
Yeah. But it's the baptism of desire. I feel like I've got a lot to learn, but I don't think there is a good explanation of mechanism out there. And you hear talk about, people having, a religious experience. Well, and I had something like that as a heretic when I read the Bible, read the Psalms and Proverbs for the first time. Got on my knees. I believe that I had at least some kind of prevenient grace working in my life at that time. But as much as I look, I don't see a clear mechanism describing, okay, baptism of desire works thus and such.
No, there isn't one.
Yeah. And so
there isn't one because it's never been defined. The magisterium has never taught this idea, not even approaching explaining how it works. So even amongst the people you can see who wrote about it, they're very skimpy on the details of how exactly it works because it's just a big mystery. They don't know. And the reason they don't know is because it's not how God works. God said, unless you're born again of water, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And there's no water in baptism of desire because that's the whole point of the theory. And so I read in the one video that like St. Peter Canisius, who was at Trent, Saint Dr. Theologian, his catechism is my favorite catechism. He wrote explicitly that there's no remission of sins outside the church, and you can only join the church through faith and baptism. So that's completely incompatible with baptism of desire. The BOD people are saying, no, he is getting his sins remitted, even though he's not baptized. And the other thing you said earlier is, well, the baptism's the gateway, and I'm convinced that you have to be inside the Catholic Church to be saved. How does baptism of desire put you inside the church? No one knows.
Yeah,
they just assert it, but there's no proof for it.
And it would seem to me that is where the idea that what must happen at or after death, which if we could backtrack maybe a little bit here now to some of our earlier discussion, that's another term that is vaguely thrown around and like it's some kind of a theological definition, but nobody can pin their finger on it, is at the point of death. They're going to have this conversion at the point of death. And like St. Fulgentius, and I think it's Council of Florence is where he's kind of paraphrased or a similar statement, something he said. And I believe it's those who have remained in the church at the time of their death.
Yes.
So the future perfect, whatever Latin that is, verb tense, you have remained in the church. I don't see anything in the Fathers about at the point of death. I recently reviewed Augustine's debate with Faustus the Manichaean, and he wished him to accept the Catholic faith before he dies. He didn't tell him, well, when you die, an angel's going to come and talk to you and boy, that's really your last chance. You better hop on that bus. And we can joke about it, but it's, of course it's dead serious.
It is.
It's dead serious that you have to convert while you're alive and remain in the faith. Yes. And it's not like while your heart quits beating and your blood oxygen level drops below 70 and now you're done. And I'm no theologian. I know, like with the last rites, there is a time that the soul's still in the body, that the last rites can be performed. And so I'm not trying to mock any of that. I'm not. But
your point is, it's true though. Like Florence said, before the end of their lives.
Yeah. So not at the point of death. It didn't say if they convert at the point of death. Yeah, they have to be remaining in the faith.
Yep.
At that point.
Yep. They have to persevere in the bosom and unity of the Catholic Church before the end of their lives.
Yeah.
So it's not compatible, especially people who've said after death. That's complete nonsense. That is total heresy against Florence. There is no converting after death. Because again, true death doesn't mean, this is why I think people get confused, because it doesn't mean death that as it's apparent to us. True death is when the soul is separated from the body. So even if we look at someone and they look dead, their soul may not be separated from their body. But actual true death, like theological death, is when your soul leaves the body, when the composite is separated. Once that happens, all the De Fide teaching is you are immediately judged. You immediately are before the judgment and you are given your place, heaven, hell, or purgatory. So you only have a chance if your soul is still with your body. Once that separation happens, it's the judgment. And so that's not up for discussion. That's very established Catholic dogma and all the consistent teaching. I just read Aquinas today on it in Summa Contra Gentilis about the death being the separation of the body and the soul, and that you proceed immediately to judgment once that has happened. So there's none of this at death has to mean before they actually die. Mm-hmm. If you're muddying the waters and trying to mean something that's not that, then you're getting into the heresy realm, because they have to do it before they die.
Yeah, he didn't talk about getting to sit down with St. Michael or something after your heart quit beating, and you've got one last chance to accept the faith at that point. That was not mentioned by St. Thomas.
No,
and I haven't heard anyone, and so I guess that's one of my kind of, I don't know, maybe it's a pet peeve that you've got what we have right now. So the world is a train wreck. We're in the post-Vatican II apostasy. It's horrific. And, just to be clear, all the bishops that we have now are, I think, like us, but even more so, in an impossible situation almost. I mean, the circumstances we're in are insane.
Yes.
And I don't know what to make out of it. I'm not sure anybody properly understands it. The longer I think about it, the more I'm convinced that I don't think any of us do. I think it'll be revealed one day, and it's a mess. So I just want to acknowledge that up front. I don't want to stand and judge these men that have, given their lives to try to guide the faithful and provide sacraments in these insane situations. But that being said, what they have to work with largely is manuals that were written while the church was being overrun. Right? The Pius X wrote in Pascendi, whatever chapter, whatever the number is, 59, that you cannot trust an imprimatur. He said you absolutely cannot trust an imprimatur, and that books that contain modernism are so prevalent that it would not be practical to go through and get rid of them all. So he is the great hammer of heresy, and he's saying, look, I can't even go through and throw them all out. Even if I mobilized and tried to, there's just so many, and they're popping up so fast. And I'm, of course, paraphrasing, but that's the sense I got from that. So how much more so after that? I think that was Pascendi's like 1910, 1915, somewhere in there. And so we're going all the way up, and most of the stuff that we're able to get now, that the priests, the seminaries, all of us faithful, we're finding stuff from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. After the death of Pius X, things got way worse, and then the boat hit the rocks. And so that's why I'm saying, we've got to kind of clear through some of this, but then how do you do that in a unified way? Because
right.
I think a lot of people have come to the conclusion of, well, we go back to the last valid pope, which was Pius XII, and if it passed muster under him, well, then who are we to question it, right? But so much of that was modernist. But no two people are going to pick the same ones to throw out and keep. So I think we're kind of doomed not to have unity unless there was a true pope, which I don't think we're going to have before the second coming. That's my hunch. It just doesn't seem like it. So it is a bad situation. And so with some of these criticisms I've leveled, I just feel like I wanted to say that too, that I'm not saying I see a way out, or that if people would just listen to me, boy, we could solve all the problems. That's not it at all. It's just, I'd like to acknowledge I think it's a mess, and I really appreciate those people that are trying to sort things out, but I don't think we're going to get unity out of it.
Well, I think all true Catholics are always united anyway. So the church always has essential unity, regardless. So all that can happen to the mystical body is people can leave it or join it, but it can never totally go away. And anybody who's actually in it is one. So even if I don't know, like there could be some Catholic in the Philippines right now, I don't have any idea who they are, but if they really are a Catholic, then I am united with them, whether I know them or not. And so that's happened all throughout history. Like the Christians in Spain didn't know what any of the names of the people were in the Philippines, but they exist and they're real people and they are preserving the faith. So if they are in fact Catholic, there's always unity by definition. But yeah, it's a horrible situation. I don't know if we're going to get another pope or not. It would definitely seem to take some pretty incredible means to get one. I know people are trying though. And then the flip side is some people did elect popes, but then nobody followed them. So it's like, how do we really get everybody on the same page? It's going to be hard, but if salvation was impossible, then the world would have ended. So we are still here by God's grace, and that means that there is technically hope for every single person who's alive.
Amen.
To be saved.
Yes.
And this is the Jansenism that comes in, that all this defeatism of, well, no, because most people are damned. Yes, but if it was impossible for them to be saved, they wouldn't be here. God puts every single person in the exact time period that is most beneficial for their salvation and gives them enough grace, sufficient grace, to be saved. So the only reason anybody's damned is because they choose to be damned. That's St. Leonard of Portmorris in his great sermon on the fewness of the saved. Thy damnation comes from thee. If you want to be saved, you will be saved. If you want to be damned, you will be damned. It's really that simple, because God doesn't want you to be damned. He wants to save everybody. But getting it into what we might disagree on now, there's a means. How does he do that? And that's where everybody fights. So how? The atheist says there doesn't have to be any how. You don't have to believe anything. And then it walks its way up the line until you get back to St. Peter Canisius. Unless you are joined to the church by faith in baptism and persevere in it, you cannot be saved. So which one's the divine revelation? It's not atheism, but is the divine revelation that men can be saved without baptism, or that men need baptism?
Well, I know this is the big question that we have here tonight, so I'll just lay my cards on the table. I believe, and again, fallible layman, this is just my opinion from reading the early church. I've been reading it for about 20 years, got me out of Mennonitism. It's an Anglican for about 10 years, and now I'm a Catholic. So the baptism of blood, I believe, is a part of the deposit of faith. And the reason why I believe that is because, basically, I guess, two talking points for tonight. One, that it is so widely taught. And two, that it has never been corrected. So specifically corrected. Now, there are statements, and I'm sure you'll bring some up, that would seem to exclude it. But that was kind of my point with my baptism of blood video, is that some of the fathers who teach baptism of blood also make statements that would seem to exclude it. So for me, and I'm not saying that this is that you must accept this, but just for me, that alone, the total absence of any explicit corrections would be why I believe that it is part of the deposit of faith that was left to the apostles. And as far as the positive teachings of Christ, we do have in the Bible that not everything he taught is in there. You know, that if all the things that Christ were to have done were be written down, the world would not contain the writings. So there are oral traditions that aren't in the Bible. 2 Thessalonians 2:14 also says that, hold what we've handed down, whether by word or epistle. So that's my position on that. As far as baptism of desire, I'm trying to understand it. I believe that it may have been a development that came out of it, and that there do seem to be some very explicit rejections of it. Or not a reject. No, I would take that back. I don't know of any explicit rejections of it. So an explicit rejection to me would be, I'll give a concrete example, would be Pope Pius IX saying that he's horrified. He is literally in horror that people would say that he has the opinion that people could be saved in a non-Catholic sect. So that is him explicitly correcting the doctrine of invincible ignorance for salvation, if for lack of a better term. So I don't find anything like that for either of the two, although there are statements. I'd say St. John Chrysostom seems to say that the baptism of desire is not an option. He's saying that catechumens that die without it are lost. Tertullian and Saint Cyril of Jerusalem and Saint Fulgentius all give one and only exception, which is baptism of blood. So to me, I believe that it appears, with my limited knowledge that I've seen, that perhaps baptism of desire is development. And there is a place for legitimate development of doctrine in the Catholic Church. I understand that you think this isn't one of them, but that is the concept that I would see it falling under, and that baptism of blood to me does seem to be part of the deposit of faith. So let me know why I'm wrong.
So do you have any magisterial citations for, we'll just stick with baptism of blood, because if that one isn't true, then baptism of desire is not true either. So are you aware of any place the magisterium teaches baptism of blood?
You know, to me, it's just, and maybe I'm not as up on the terms of what is and isn't ordinary magisterium, extraordinary magisterium.
Well, yeah, then I'll specify. So anything from papal authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, to me, I would have to differ, I guess, maybe with you on the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Now, I'm not going to say it's infallible, but I'm going to say that you had popes that were career heresy smashers going over that thing with a fine-tooth comb. And then the statements in there that line up with everything that came before it. So I'm more looking at it in a holistic sense.
So you're not aware of where it was positively taught, though? Like, where did the magisterium teach baptism of blood is this, and this is how it works, and this is what it is?
Well, I would say just the fact that so many fathers throughout time, and I believe also Florence. Now, I would understand with your perspective that you would not see Florence as teaching it, but Florence is essentially echoing Saint Fulgentius, who explicitly teaches it. And so their mention of martyrdom there, from my perspective, it would seem natural to read that as baptism of blood. Now,
but it doesn't say that, right?
it says even if they are martyred.
That they can't be saved.
Even if they're martyred, if they don't hold the faith. And that's the point, is that if they're martyred, they hold the faith, that the martyrdom there commonly in the fathers is discussed that it is a remission for the baptized. It would be like an extreme unction, but it is also in the place of baptism for those who have not yet been baptized. So that's explicitly taught, and the two are taught together. So the idea of on the one hand, if you're not baptized, it gives you the place of baptism. And on the other hand, if you are baptized, you get basically, it's like doing a good confession, and you get additional merits because you've been martyred, is my crude understanding of it. So I understand from your perspective, those are two separate issues, and we can look at each case and shoot them down, or they stand or fall, and that you might not accept that. But from my perspective, I do see that Florence is in that statement echoing St. Fulgentius, and that is how I believe is an understanding that's in harmony with the fathers that do speak on the issue.
Right. Florence said, though, that you can't be, even if you're martyred, that you cannot be saved unless you persevere in the bosom and unity of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So when is this baptism of blood person a member of the church?
And that's a good question. And like I said, there are questions here that not only do I not have the answers to, but people that would probably not give you the time of day and not talk to you, I don't think they have good answers either. And that's
why they don't talk.
Yeah, and so I just want to acknowledge that I don't claim to have all the answers, and I don't see everyone else doesn't have all those answers either, but it's just the sheer volume that's convincing me. But I can speculate. I would say that, and that is, I think, one of the strongest arguments for the absolute necessity, excluding baptism of blood. One of the strongest arguments, in my opinion, is that it has been so often repeated and defined that baptism is the entrance into the church. It is the one gateway to the church, and outside that church, there is no salvation. It's the door to the ark.
But that means baptism of blood would have to be another door, because you're not getting water baptism in baptism of blood. So now the one door has to become two doors, because this person who supposedly is going to heaven after their baptism of blood, they never go through the door of water baptism, because that's the whole point of the theory.
And that is where I would disagree with you. The fathers that discuss it say that it is a baptism, and that there's not two baptisms, there's one. Tertullian is the earliest person that we have discussing the issue, and granted, he's no doctor of the faith, but he does specifically say that there are not two baptisms, there's one. And I'll make an anecdote to maybe convey the idea. Bishop Tethero, on his Catholic Guide discussion, episode 3, at the 5-minute mark, and forgive me if I'm quoting him wrong here, he said that there's one thing that the Council of Trent made clear about baptism: matter, form, and intent. Right? That's 3 things: matter, form, and intent. But it's one thing. And, you've got other concepts, obviously, the Trinity. It's one God, it's not 3 gods. So, anyway, that's I think, and I think Thomas Aquinas also says the same thing about it. So, to me, I can't prove it. There's only a few statements, but it would seem to harmonize with what all the people are saying. Nobody's saying it's a second door, and also nobody's ever objecting to them that what your objection is. That I don't see that objection in history, that anyone ever brings it up when you've got 2,000 years of people positing baptism of blood, clearly, and then baptism of desire, amen, event, over time.
So then they're the same thing. You're still going through the one door, even though you're not getting water.
Yeah, that would have to be somehow. Yeah, and like I said, I don't have a clear answer for it. I don't like sit here, hey, I've got an open and shut case. Here's 20 verses.
I mean,
Shut up and listen. I'm not
right.
saying that. I'm just saying it must be how they look at it.
Right. But see, then people also said that that's baptism of desire. It's the same thing. It's still one door with now you can also have desire and not just blood, which a lot of the fathers you quoted exclude baptism of desire.
Right. Yeah.
So we can't have
both
both of them because we're going to have to throw out most of the early fathers like Cyprian, Fulgent, Cyril. There's no exceptions for them except martyrdom.
Yeah.
So that means
very explicit. They say only
right.
Only martyrdom.
So that means baptism of desire is not true if they are correct. But everybody today wants to lump them all together and say, no, they're all one and the same and they all go.
Or that it was a legitimate development. And in my way of thinking, it would have to be something that is extremely rare. If you accept the definition of the Catechism of the Council of Trent, it's saying contrition and a desire for baptism. And that would have to be than a Catholic, and most Catholics are not saved. That would have to be an extreme contrition and an extreme desire for the baptism. And like I said, I don't have a clean theological explanation, but for me, I've gotten my way here because the fathers taught the papacy. Now it's pretty easy being an Anglican. I was able to submit to a bishop that never asked anything of me. The singing was great, and they had tea and cake after church, and everything was fine. Right. But I'm moving the direction that I see the historic evidence. Now, does that mean I'm a great theologian or I have all these logical arguments? No. But when I see something that's taught throughout history and it's never corrected, and that's the thing for me. I mean, you've got all these catechisms, all these quotes. We can go through.
Well, a lot of catechisms don't teach it.
Right. A lot of them don't, and I acknowledge that. But I'm just saying,
and a lot of theologians never taught it either.
Yeah, and I
so
acknowledge
why aren't we picking the bigger lump of people who didn't teach it?
Well, and I'll tell you why. So we can take the quotes that we do have for it, and you and I, we could go through, and we could each decide, no, that one's not good, or we're going to put a question mark by it and go down the list. But there'd be some that we'd both agree. Yep, they're both definitely teaching. I think you call it a substitutionary BOD and or a substitutionary baptism of blood. But the clinker for me, and I have wrestled with this issue, but the clinker for me is just the complete absence of a absolute correction. So even the people you have that don't teach it, and they make exclusive statements, which also baptism of blood proponents make similar statements, right? So you can make that statement and still believe the other way. That's in my
we don't have but we can't. Right.
You have St. Peter Canisius going. What I would ask is, give me where he says St. Cyprian was wrong.
Well, does he have to do that though? Why would he have to do that?
Oh, he doesn't have to. I'm just saying to convince me.
I don't think you'll be convinced then, because I don't know. I don't think that exists.
Right. And that's my issue. Is that the fact that you have that many different people, catechisms, formal statements that talk about these issues, and never, ever do we have one person going, oh yeah, that concept is actually incorrect. Here's the correct teaching.
Well, then why doesn't the magisterium teach it then? Like when Trent is defining the sacraments and how people are saved, why are they not there?
Well, I think that the Council of Trent, I think the point that the word out, right, can be and or are. And I go and look in the Oxford Dictionary. My first definition, out, is and that does make sense of the verse. So you could say you have to have, and I'm probably not wording it right, but baptism and the desire for it, right?
An adult would, yeah.
That makes sense. That does make sense. Right. But out can also mean baptism or the desire for it. And we have people throughout history since then that have discussed it and said that they believed that it taught baptism of desire.
But we have a lot who said it didn't.
Right. But
so that's the problem. So going with what
you don't have anybody that's saying that the baptism desire people explicitly are wrong. And I'm just telling you that for me is the decider.
Yeah, but doesn't that follow logically? Like if I tell you that it doesn't mean either or, then I don't have to explicitly tell you baptism of desire is false. That means the passage doesn't allow for it.
No, and I think in many cases that can be true, but over the whole course of 2,000 years to never have even one where it's explicitly corrected, for me, really is what settled this issue for me.
Right. So your proof,
something to it.
Right. So your proof then is not any positive teaching. Your main proof is an argument from silence.
Well, there's positive. It's all the teaching that's out there on the subject.
No, but you said the main thing that clinched it for you was that there's an argument from silence where nobody corrected it.
Right. And just
because that's not a positive teaching. That's just that there's an
no. It's not just that. It's the combination of all the teaching that is out there with never having it been positively corrected. That I couldn't say that it's error, that those people are teaching error. The church has never corrected them. And especially when a lot of the people that make statements in favor of baptism of blood, and in some cases also baptism of desire, you can find individual statements from them that would appear to exclude it. So an exclusionary statement, I think, in this one for me is particularly inadmissible because you have people that view it, that make statements that would seem exclusionary, but in their mind, they can also turn around and make an inclusionary statement and they see no conflict. So a lot of the objections that you bring up, while I think they're very good and very worth discussing, what would take it to push me off of my position is for you to show me that it was talked about in the 3rd century, in the 4th century, that your objections have a historical basis to them of people actually bringing those arguments to bear on baptism of desire and baptism of blood.
Well, nobody even taught baptism of blood until Tertullian.
Yeah, but I mean, there's very little writings before then, too. I mean, most all of our writings are after that.
Well, it's like you have Saint Irenaeus before that, and he didn't.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that he was the earliest one that we have a record of. Yeah,
right. Like Tertullian's the first record we can find of baptism of blood, and Saint Augustine is the first record we can find of baptism of desire in like the 390s.
Yeah. So if we could
my argument then would be, where is this? If this is taught from Christ, because that's what we have to establish. Because if it's not a teaching of Christ, it's not true. Theologians can't make stuff up later and say this is true.
I agree. Yeah.
So if Cyprian or Tertullian invented this, it's false. It doesn't matter how saintly they were. And we know Tertullian was not saintly, but Cyprian was saintly, but Cyprian also famously rejected the Pope for a long time on the rebaptism of heretics.
Well, I wouldn't say that Cyprian rejected the Pope.
Oh no, he did though.
He disagreed with it.
No, he said the Pope was wrong for a while, and then eventually he did submit. But he opposed him originally, even when he was corrected.
Saint Stephen really ticked him off, and he lost his cookies on him. I'll give you that. But I don't think he ever rejected the office of the papacy.
No, but he did.
He didn't like Stephen very well because he corrected Cyprian on their local practice of baptism.
Yes. But my point in bringing that up is it doesn't matter if it's a saint or a doctor or a father. If they are the first ones who actually taught it, it's not true. Because that also violates what we said earlier about St. Vincent of Lerins, what has always been believed and always taught everywhere, which by definition can't be true if a father is making it up 200, 300 years after Jesus.
No, and I totally agree. And I would disagree with you that this meets that standard. There's Marian doctrines that we would both hold to as a dogma that are very sparsely spoken about in these early times. Now, there's other stuff like the creation issue that the amount of discussion of Genesis being a literal history that you can have a time frame constructed on is maybe 10 times as much discussion on that than there is a baptism of blood or desire. But I think that that is fitting because it's a footnote doctrine. It's a asterisk. You know,
well, what is
and I agree that you wouldn't even need to teach it.
Well, that's a problem then, because you can't. This is why no missionaries taught this. I haven't found one missionary who actually spent his life going to convert people who ever taught these things. Because if you, as you already said, if you explain this to a pagan you're trying to convert, it is absolutely faith destroying to believe in these things. And it violates all of the papal teaching. So I'm not hearing any papal authority from St. Peter's magisterium to prove this. So like St. Leo in his 16th letter said, even in persecution, the singular hope of salvation is water baptism.
Mm-hmm.
He did not tell them, but make sure you tell them that if they don't have recourse to a priest, they can shed their blood and go to heaven. Well, that's criminal negligence on Pope Leo's part if that's actually true. If you can actually be saved that way, and he didn't tell anybody that, and he's making you think the only remedy you have is water, then he's mortally sinning negligently by not telling them that. He's making them fear for something they don't need to fear. And he's addressing the very situation of persecution, shipwreck, danger of sudden death or illness. Because he's renouncing people who were refusing to baptize people outside of the Easter and Pentecost time, because that was the tradition back then of we only baptize then because it's more symbolically powerful. But he's telling all the clergy, no, in any necessity, baptism is to take place at any time. Why? Because it's the singular hope of salvation for them. And he's well after Cyprian, Fulgence, all these guys who taught baptism of blood, Pope, martyr, doctor. If he knows that's true and he's not teaching it to people, he is mortally, sinfully negligent, and he cannot be a saint.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree with that assessment of it. And like I said, I don't see that argument being made in the past. You know, if that's your position that he'd be sinning by not including that doctrine.
Well, then tell me how he wouldn't be sinning. If it's true that you could be saved without baptism and he doesn't tell anybody that, how is that not sinful?
I think he's exhorting them in a way that's wonderful to make sure that these people get baptized, which is the one sure remedy of salvation.
But he didn't say it's the one sure remedy. He said it is the only remedy, singular remedy.
Sure. And depending on how you look at it, that could have been understood that baptism of blood was included in that. And maybe,
so that's the argument then, is when he says that, it's understood by everyone he's talking to that baptism
possibly. No, and I don't know that. I don't know that. And I'm not.
Right, well, yeah, because there's no evidence.
And like I said, I don't have a quick answer to shut you down on everything. You've got a lot of good points, and that's one of them. But I don't necessarily think that he'd be committing a sin if he didn't happen to mention baptism of blood.
No, well, let's suppose that it's true that you could be saved by martyrdom without baptism, and it's not the same as water. No one understands that. He has to explain it. If he had to explain that, but he didn't, how would that not be negligence?
I don't know. To me, it seems like he's exhorting them to get these people baptized when danger approaches. And, if he didn't cross all his I's and dot all his T's, I don't think that's necessarily a sin, if that's even what the case would be. But
that's fine.
Yeah.
But the point again is, do you really believe Jesus taught this? You think this is something he taught the apostles?
Yeah, I believe that this is something, and if it wasn't, I can't say whether Jesus explicitly discussed this issue. I wouldn't dare to assert one way or another, but let's just say I believe that it is enough widely accepted and has never been corrected. To me, that would indicate that it is something that was taught everywhere, always, and by all. And like I said, there are doctrines by the Justin Martyr, Saint Athenagoras, all these guys that came and wrote before Tertullian, Irenaeus, that didn't address it. I haven't found anything in there.
Then let's go back to Jesus.
Because I believe it's a footnote issue. It's not core doctrine that has to be taught in order to be saved. You don't have to believe in baptism of desire to become a Catholic. You don't even have to be aware of the issue.
What about baptism of blood?
Yeah, I don't believe that has to be necessarily taught. You could have a catechism that would.
You're on the outs now with everybody who believes it.
Well, yeah. Well,
they all think you have to know it.
Yeah. Well, my position on invincible ignorance and creationism basically puts me on the outs with most all traditionalists, including clergy that I'm aware of. It's generally that these 20th century ideas are what has been fallen back to after Vatican II. Yeah. So, you know, right, well, I don't know what will happen if I take some more controversial positions. I maybe get ignored more vigorously. I don't know.
Probably.
It's interesting to see what happens.
We'll do about maybe 10 or 15 more minutes, and I want to see about questions from the audience. But
absolutely. And I'm sorry, I'm not. I don't have better answers. I mean, my answer is so simple.
I still have a few questions for you, though. So
yeah, absolutely.
Because again, I understand what you're saying. The problems that I have with it are that everyone didn't teach it. It's not a unanimous teaching. So to appeal to the ordinary magisterium doesn't work. It has to be unanimous.
And as well, I was very careful to avoid that word.
Right. No, but I'm saying that means we have it's not anything that it should even be discussed then, because if it's not, we don't know it's true.
Oh, I'm not saying it is or isn't ordinary magisterium. I'm just saying, to me, there's enough evidence there that I can't call it wrong. And it seems to be, especially with the baptism of blood, was so celebrated.
Let's get to that then. So when Jesus Christ said, unless a man is born again of water and the Holy Ghost, you believe that's compatible with baptism of blood?
I'll have to fall back on what St. Augustine said, that he likewise absolutely said, whosoever shall confess me before men, I will confess them before my Father.
So are you saying that? Yeah, but
I believe that verse absolutely.
But does that mean John 3:5 then is not? There's exceptions to water. You don't have to be born again of water.
Well, let me say this. And what about the verse? And boy, I'd feel really smart if I had the verse memorized. But the one that Augustine put forward, that whosoever shall confess me before men, I shall confess them before the Father. And he did that explicitly, relating it to John 3:5, saying both of these verses are absolute. So
right, because anyone who's going to be baptized is confessing Christ.
Right, but he was saying it in the context of baptism of blood. So he was saying that he absolutely believes both of these are true. So you can't object John 3:5 to that. And that to me is just an example.
The bottom line is, are there exceptions to being born again of water or not?
Well, I wish I could get St. Augustine here to explain that to you, why he thinks.
No, St. Augustine said no one is saved without the sacrament. Do you believe that?
Well, in the discussion I'm speaking of, he said he was arguing for baptism of blood.
Right. In his later anti-Pelagian writings, he refutes all that and says that you are not predestined for eternal life unless you receive the sacrament of the mediator.
I would have to see that where he specifically rejects his statements on baptism of blood, because, like I said,
well, again, you're asking for something. You're asking for something that you I think doesn't exist.
Right.
So it's about whether the doctrines are compatible.
Well, right,
it's not about, because you're not going to get anybody to say baptism of blood is false, and you're not going to get anybody to say water baptism is false. Neither person said that. So.
Right,
that's not the way we're going to arrive at truth on that.
Can I tell you though, my thoughts on St. Augustine with that is that he is one of the ones I used in the baptism of blood video I made, that he makes and I don't know if it's the one you're referring to, but he makes many statements on the necessity of water baptism.
Right, which you don't
believe.
And he
also says that baptism of blood is more glorious, is also a true one. He uses the whoever confesses me before men, I will confess to my Father, specifically in relation to John 3:5, to explain how both of those two absolute statements can be simultaneously true and not in conflict with each other. So I believe that it would be his answer. And the fact that he makes later exclusive statements like he did before the baptism of blood, to me, wouldn't disprove it. He'd have to say, yeah, I was wrong about that. Now, he did say he no longer thought that the thief was a good argument for actually a couple of different reasons. He said that.
Right.
But to my knowledge, he never backed out on either baptism of blood or baptism of desire.
Well, see, this is part of the problem. Baptism of blood is a euphemism for martyrdom in many cases. So he's not going to reject that phrase because it can also mean martyrdom, but that does not mean that you don't need water baptism. And I'm going to go a little bit here because there's so many problems, unfortunately, with the idea that just don't add up. So Pius XII taught infallibly, you're not a member of the church unless you receive the laver of regeneration. But the whole point of the BOB theory is you don't receive the laver of regeneration. So if you want every angle we look at this from, church membership, they're not members. They don't pass through the laver of regeneration. Everyone admits that. So trying to say it's connected to the sacrament, that doesn't work because it's not the sacrament. You admit that, right?
Well, do you
receive a sacrament?
Is explicitly, and this is another really place where I'll acknowledge you have a good objection, because I believe there are definitions that say baptism is only real and natural water, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. But
no, what I'm asking right now is baptism of blood a sacrament?
Well, you have multiple fathers that say that it supplies the grace of the sacrament.
No, but it's not a sacrament, though.
Well, I don't know how they would look at it and how you harmonize that with these other statements.
A sacrament is an outward sign instituted
Again,
by Christ to give grace.
Yeah,
so then it cannot be a sacrament, right? Like we have to agree on that.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to think, because you have these fathers.
Before you go there, though, don't get to the objection yet. If there's only 7 sacraments,
right?
Baptism of blood cannot be a sacrament because that would be another sacrament.
Well, I think, like I said, I wish I could give
because it wasn't instituted. It was not instituted by Christ as an outward sign to give grace. That's the definition.
But
there's no matter or form that's been prescribed, so it cannot be a sacrament, right?
I don't know what to say to that, because you've got. And just if I could, I know I'm being wishy-washy here. I admit it. You are. I am. No, I'll admit it. But
you are.
It's because the way that they looked at it, I don't want to mischaracterize it or anything like that. But it's like they said it supplies that grace, and you also have the idea that it's not 2, it's 1. So I think in some sense they viewed the baptism of blood as part of baptism and vice versa.
But that doesn't mean it's a sacrament, though. Like, is baptism of blood a sacrament?
If it's part of baptism, it would be. But then you've got your definitions that say it has to be real and natural water, right?
No, because it's even. I'm not even getting to that. Just the definition of a sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. So,
maybe getting your head sawed off while you're confessing Christ is not an outward sign.
But then you'd have to say it's a sacrament. They receive.
Yeah, I suppose you would.
Okay, well, all right. Well, then here's the problem. Everyone who taught this admits there's no character. You don't receive a character with baptism of blood or desire, but you do in water baptism.
I haven't heard anyone specifically say that about
Aquinas and St. Alphonsus
baptism of blood. I've heard that about baptism of desire. If there are ones on baptism of blood specifically addressing that, I would love to see them.
Yeah,
I say that in all sincerity. Please pass them on to me.
There's no sacramental character with desire or martyrdom, because they're like, martyrdom is not a sacramental rite. And that's inarguable. It's not a right. It's not a right the church can give you. It's not a sacrament the church can administer. It's something that's being done to you. Someone's murdering you, but it's not a right
that God only grants to certain people.
Yes,
so I mean, it is a divine and holy thing that gives a 100-fold increase. It's
it is, but that doesn't make it a sacrament.
Yeah,
it has to be a right. It's not a right. No, and nobody who's ever argued for it has said this. So I mean, you would be the lone man, which you can be if you want to be, but you would be the lone man saying it's a sacramental right.
I'm just saying that a number of the fathers say it does, like, explicitly say that it supplies the grace.
It does not get, none of them teach it gives you a sacrament.
But they say it gives you, it's more glorious than baptism.
That doesn't matter, though.
Great merits. Hang on a second. Leave it. He was.
It can be more glorious. That's fine, but that doesn't mean anything as far as whether it's a sacrament.
So, yeah, and but they're also explicit that it can be granted to people who are unbaptized. So I get your objection that in the case of a catechumen, that doesn't always mean that the person's unbaptized, right? You can refer to people as catechumens who are baptized.
Right.
But likewise, some of them are not baptized. And some of the discussions, they're explicit that they're not baptized.
Right.
So just to clarify that.
No, that's true. I'm not disputing that there are quotes that say that someone who isn't baptized can go to heaven with martyrdom. That some of those quotes exist. There's not very many. Most of the baptism of blood quotes are about people who were already baptized, like St. Chrysostom's quote about St. Lucian, a priest who got the baptism of blood. Well, people rush to assume that means he wasn't baptized. Well, he's a priest, so he had to be baptized. So using that in favor of you don't need water is either disingenuous or they just don't know.
Yeah.
But it's not a good example.
A lot with the fathers, people just grab stuff and don't really read about it.
And it's because Jesus called his passion a baptism. So then a lot of the fathers use that poetic language to refer to martyrdom that way, but most of them are not talking about whether you even need water or not. It's something like St. John Chrysostom's quote, where the phrase is there, but they're not saying you don't need water.
I wouldn't necessarily agree that most of them. I'd say many of them are very explicitly talking about unbaptized persons being martyred. But I would agree with you that as far as topics in the early church go, this is a small one. Right. I totally grant you that. Right. I totally grant you that.
Right. Well, because again,
small one,
because the popes aren't teaching.
And I would challenge anybody who believes in baptism of desire or baptism of blood, that if you don't believe in a literal Genesis, that you're being very inconsistent. So, thank you for letting me plug my pet issue.
Well, but see, this is the problem, though, is you have way more consensus on Genesis being literal than you do about baptism of blood.
Complete unanimity.
Not even close. And we're not bound. We're not bound to the fathers unless they're unanimous.
Yeah. And then we've got
any one opinion of a father, even if you can take 3 or 4 of them together, that does not prove that it's true. It doesn't prove it's part of divine revelation.
Yeah.
It doesn't prove the church approves of it. It doesn't prove that the church approves of it just because nobody corrected them. Nobody corrected St. Thomas after the Immaculate Conception was defined either. None of the popes saw fit for some reason to say the Summa is now heretical against the Immaculate Conception. But it is. But nobody corrected it. Well, how's that possible? 250 years after? No, it's because they don't have to do that. That doesn't prove, I can't read the Summa now and say, well, St. Thomas denied the Immaculate Conception and nobody corrected him even after 1854, so it must be true. I can't say that because it's condemned. His position is not compatible with, and again, they don't say St. Thomas was wrong, but his teaching cannot be squared with the dogma now. The dogma is she never conceived any sin whatsoever. And St. Thomas said she had to have some sin because if she didn't, she wouldn't need a redeemer. And that's derogatory to Christ. So he's 100% wrong, infallibly wrong. He's not a heretic, but he's 100% wrong. And if I read that today, I cannot say, well, after 1854, they still taught the Summa everywhere. Nobody said you have to take out the heresy in the Summa. Yep. So that silence doesn't prove.
Pius X has encouraged all priests to look to St. Thomas as a cure for modernism.
Right, because he is.
Yeah.
He is. But the point is he has errors in the Summa. And even things that after 1854 are heretical, and nobody saw fit for the next 200 years, 150 years to make a statement that this needs to be taken out of the Summa, or we need to correct him publicly so nobody's confused. Never happened. So does that prove that he was right? No, it doesn't. He was still wrong. So just because nobody corrected St. Augustine or St. Cyril, that doesn't mean that it's true. And again, when you really compare, because we get myopic, I think, on some of these people. If you step back and look at the whole history of every theologian and look at how few people actually taught it, it's a vast majority who never taught it at all. And so how is that possible? And when you get to all these councils, Trent, Florence, all these places defining salvation, this is because here's the problem. These issues are directly tied into the most important part of the faith, which is how are you saved? So the fact that no pope has ever defined them, no pope has ever, because you said BOD has no mechanism, nobody knows how it works. How is it not defined? If it was developed by Augustine in 393, and we've had 1700 years of development on that, no pope for some reason, you want to talk about argument from silence, no pope ever saw fit to define it. No pope ever saw fit to clarify how it works. And it's the same thing for baptism of blood. They never clarified that it's a thing, how it works, where it first came from. And even Cyprian, when he taught it, he doesn't appeal to any authority above him. He doesn't say, this is what has been passed down from Christ. He uses his own reasoning to come up with it.
I would have to disagree with you on that. I'd say that that Saint Cyprian, if you go back and read it, he specifically attributes the teaching to Christ.
Where did Christ teach it? He say
he gives several scripture quotes, and so I just encourage you to just read that quote.
Right. Well, send me that one.
It seems to me like he is pointing to Christ, and also with Saint Augustine, saying that he developed it. I just would encourage you to maybe be careful using that term because you're not sure of that he developed it. He's maybe the first one you can point to
that's what I'm
seeing it, but he may have learned it from someone else. We don't know.
Well, he didn't say
just to be fair.
Yeah, no, he didn't say that though. For baptism of desire, he said, after considering this over and over, I think.
For that verse. Yeah.
No, for the whole concept of baptism of desire.
Okay, I took it as being that verse, which is very interesting because he's the first person to turn away from the thief, not just in saying that he pointed out the fact that how is this even a baptism of blood, which the common opinion of the fathers is that they consider the thief baptism of blood, but he's going, he was converted while he was suffering. He wasn't suffering for Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a very interesting
and he
statement.
died before baptism was obligatory anyway.
Yeah, but I think just to do justice to Augustine, I don't think we can say that he originated the concept because
what I meant by
that's
that
kind of
is
an argument from silence. Most of the writings from that time period we don't have, and we don't have any of the verbal conversations. So we didn't have.
What I meant by that
YouTube
is he's the earliest citation for baptism of desire.
Well, that is an interesting subject in and of itself. I'd say there's a couple earlier.
Who's earlier than him for baptism of desire?
I'm not really prepared to discuss that right now, but because you've been such a gracious host, before I come out with anything, I'll give you a heads up.
Sounds good. Because I haven't found anything that's before him for BOD, for explicitly saying you can be saved by desire, not martyrdom. I don't know of anybody who did that before he did. But so, right, we'll try to wrap up and then we'll get to some questions. But obviously, I don't agree. Most of what I'm hearing is that because it wasn't condemned and there were enough people who taught it, it therefore must be true. But that doesn't work for St. Thomas's opinion on the Immaculate Conception. It doesn't work for Augustine's opinion on infants suffering the hellfire if they're not baptized. Everyone agreed with him for 700 years, and then they scrapped him in the Middle Ages. So nobody opposed him and positively agreed with him for 700 years, and then he gets left by the wayside finally when he first starts to get challenged in the Middle Ages. St. Alphonsus said, delayed ensoulment, de fide. Everybody in the Middle Ages believed in delayed ensoulment. Now nobody believes in it. So if saying that it was taught for a long period and no one condemned it doesn't prove anything. It's what is the positive teaching. So the way you get around John 3:5 is, well, baptism blood has to be in there somewhere. How are, and then St. Paul says in Galatians, as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. So that's martyrdom now. We have to read that with the understanding that martyrdom is a way to put on Christ.
Yeah, it would seem,
if that's true, we'd have to.
Case, yeah.
And then Titus 3:5 says he saved us through the washing of regeneration. Now we have to read that to mean martyrdom too.
Yeah, because if you understand it in harmony with the fathers who say that it supplies the grace of baptism, then that would be the case.
Well, that's what people say about BOD. It supplies the grace.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but the problem is nobody taught that. Even Aquinas and Alphonsus said it doesn't take away your temporal punishment, which means you're not born again.
Yeah. And, I don't have clear answers. One thing I've wondered, we've talked about angels baptizing people and the fathers being resurrected in baptism. Maybe, if the BOD people are going to be in purgatory or something, and then at the resurrection, they'll get baptized. I don't know.
Well, that's not dogma either. You can only go to purgatory if you were baptized.
Yeah, and I'll just go on record. I'm not saying any early church father taught that either. I'm just saying I don't have that. I wish I had a better answers for
that's fair.
It all work. I
appreciate your honesty.
Yeah,
I would never teach this to a catechumen or a potential convert because it'll destroy their faith. And you already admitted that. Like if you tell them there's another way besides baptism.
Yeah, well, and again,
not going to go good.
And I think it was the way it was presented. I mean, people are told you're fine.
Even if I tell you you're not fine, if I admit to you there's 3 different ways.
Yeah,
especially desire. Desire is an absolute crusher. If you tell somebody that you can just desire to go to heaven, there's no reason to get baptized.
Sure, and I think it could be presented as a very narrow gate, and that we don't know infallibly that anybody has ever been saved by baptism of desire.
That makes it even more pointless to talk about.
I agree. I don't think it's really necessary for catechesis.
I've heard this from all of them. They're like, well, we don't even know if anybody's ever been saved once by baptism of desire. I'm like, then why do you guys fight for it? Why is this such a thing that you're going to call me a heretic if I don't believe it? When not you.
But
I'm saying other people.
But just for full disclosure, you want to talk about positively. I've never heard your position ever anathematized or corrected by any of the fathers.
No.
So, but also on top of that, though, just for full disclosure, I do believe that the common understanding, we were starting to talk about it, of the Council of Trent would support the contrary position to the one you hold, in my opinion.
All right, well, then let's end with that then, because
St. Alphonsus and some of the others, they understood it. The Catechism understands it that way. To me,
this is the part nobody quotes. How many instrumental causes of justification are there?
I don't know. How many?
Well, you tell me. How many do you think it is?
I should have studied better for the test. I'm sorry.
No, so Trent in session 6, chapter 7 is what the justification of the impious is and what are the causes thereof. So this section is never read in these debates because it cannot be squared with everything we've just talked about. So when you say remission of sins, it says that justification is not simply the remission of sins, but also being born again, becoming a new man and all that. So you can't separate them, but most people do. But the big thing here is there's only all these different causes, right? The meritorious cause is Christ's passion and death, right? The formal cause is the justice of God. The instrumental cause, read it word for word. Here, let's see. The instrumental cause is the sacrament of baptism, which is the sacrament of faith, without which no man was ever justified. So the only way around that is you have to say baptism of desire and blood are sacraments. And not only that, but they can't be separate sacraments because there's not 9 sacraments or 8 sacraments. So you'd have to say baptism of blood and desire are identical to the sacrament of baptism. If they're not, then they are not in there because there's one instrumental cause. And I did this with deuterocomical. He's like, I don't know how to answer that. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, this is the problem.
I have to say, yeah, that there are a lot of loose ends that that you point out, and I think they're good points.
Pause on that then. That means the churches, like if your position's true, that means the actual teaching of the church on salvation has loose ends.
Well, I will say this: I don't fully understand them all. I'll admit that it's beyond my understanding. But
no, but don't you see how that's a problem?
Well, it would be a problem to me if what I need to see, and I know I've already said this, is that somebody bringing that objection up to the people that have commented on Trent after Trent, and just the arguments that you made being presented to them. And to me, that would be a much more serious objection. The fact that the objections that you bring forward, I don't see a historical basis for them, doesn't make them not worth answering the questions. But it does lead me with the opinion that that was what Trent intended, because all the people coming out of it, nobody disputed that that's what it was teaching.
Well, no, that's totally not true. St. Peter Canisius rejected all of it. He said Session 6, chapter 4 means everyone needs the sacrament. No baptism of blood, no baptism of desire. He's at Trent. He's at the very session that defined the sacraments in general.
He gives an explicit rejection and correction of BOD.
No, he cites Session 6, chapter 4, which is the passage everybody thinks teaches BOD. He cites that passage to prove that no one, even infants, no infant or adult, can be saved without the sacrament of baptism. So
yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is still, I come back to, I need an explicit correction of it.
Well, why would you need that when the council itself said there's only one instrumental cause?
Because people can make exclusive statements and also believe in BOD and baptism of blood and baptism of desire. I've seen it over and over again.
But here's the problem with that. The Council of Trent is not a person. St. Augustine can say whatever he wants and get something wrong. He's not infallible. The Council of Trent cannot be wrong about anything that it said. It can't lead you astray. It can't give you a false idea. It can't support a bad idea. Everything that it says is the Holy Ghost speaking.
But so you'll acknowledge that people can disagree about Council of Trent.
That doesn't mean what they're disagreeing about is true.
Right, but people do disagree about it.
You have to take the dogmas as they're written. That's Vatican I.
Right.
No, you have to retain them as they are. If you basically, here's what happens with people. I read them these definitions, and they can't say amen at the end. They have to give me a counter argument if you can't say amen at the end of any ecumenical statement from an infallible council, that should clue you in there's a problem, because I should be able to read that and everyone should be able to say yes.
Yeah, no, and I do. I accept it. I'm just saying
it doesn't work though.
That
this is what Deutero did.
That lots of people
got it wrong.
have differing opinions on some of these things.
They don't. Not on this.
There are people that look at, and to me, it would seem to be the majority that explicitly would say that the Council of Trent teaches that you must have water baptism or the desire for it. Not and, but or.
How is that?
I've already acknowledged that the Latin will allow either in my limited understanding of it. But
it's not even the Latin. Even in English, it doesn't work.
That you have lots of people afterwards that acknowledge and point to it as allowing for BOD, and nobody explicitly correcting it. To me, that is conclusive.
that doesn't mean it's a teaching, though. Again, no one corrected St. Thomas on the Immaculate Conception.
Yeah, I understand that people can, I'm talking not individual, this person, that person, throughout that argument. I'm saying overall, from beginning of history till now, there's constantly, including the Council of Trent, been people that understood John 3:5 not to conflict with baptism of blood and baptism of desire.
Yeah, Council of Trent
and we
doesn't
haven't
say
had
that.
any explicit corrections. And so for me, that closed the issue for me.
The Council of Trent doesn't say any of that. Like, none of what you just said is in the council.
Right, but there are lots of people that believe that it teaches.
It doesn't matter, though. We don't follow what other people say. We follow what the council said. We don't follow what St. Alphonsus said about the council. He's not the magisterium. He's not.
I understand what you're saying.
That's the problem. So everybody has to leave the council and go to other people, and then they appeal to which you did, an appeal to a majority, which is just a basic fallacy. With all due respect,
I'll go to the council. It says
a lot of people have interpreted it this way. Well, that's an appeal to majority, which is a fallacy.
The water or the desire for it. It can be understood that way by the basic language of it.
That very section, right?
And I believe that is the historic understanding.
No, but right after that section, the very section that says the controversial point that everybody twists says, it quotes John 3:5 and says, unless you're born again of water. So, but you're not born again of water in baptism of desire.
And I understand the objection. And like I said, there's not, to me, a neat theological answer. But throughout history, you've had people that have no problem making very exclusive statements and then turning around and believing the same thing, that baptism of blood is a possibility, and sometimes even baptism of desire. So to me, I don't see a conflict, because historically the two have been understood as being harmonious somehow. And I
don't see a conflict with baptism of blood or baptism of desire?
For both. Yeah.
Okay. So you think Trent teaches that you can be saved without water baptism?
Through baptism of desire? It does appear that way to me, yes. And that appears to be the common consent of the fathers.
I gave you the theologian. There's tons of them. St. Peter Canisius is there. He's not 200 years later like St. Alphonsus. He's at the council when it's happening.
And I think he's a great theologian, but he doesn't explicitly correct it. And that's really what I need to see, is that some of the arguments that you're putting forward here show me that they were explicitly used to reject BOD historically. That's what I'm looking for. And
so to wrap up that issue, then, do you believe then that the desire of man for baptism can wash away original sin?
In some circumstances, it does appear that has been the historic teaching.
Okay.
And I don't know how that works.
It doesn't.
Lines up with everything else. There's a lot of holes and inconsistencies. I'll admit that. And I don't have an answer for it.
No, but again, I say, with respect, the church's teaching on salvation can't have problems. It can't have holes. It can't have things that are lacking. Jesus's divine revelation cannot have things that don't really make sense and that haven't really been defined yet for 2,000 years.
But I can admit that I don't understand it all. And that's all I'm saying.
I know, but the reason you can't understand it is because they're not compatible. Because when Trent says there's one, math is numeric, there's one instrumental cause, that's not compatible with saying that desire can also be an instrument, because it says the sacrament is the instrument, not your desire for the sacrament is the instrument. So it's not logical. That's why there's no answer. There's no argument. And you keep saying it has problems and loose ends and I can't define it, because it's not definable. It's math. There's one instrumental cause. And then but really there's these other two. They're kind of connected, but we don't know how they're connected. That's not the divine. Jesus Christ did not present this to St. Peter and say, here's the teaching on salvation. I know these other two don't really make any sense, but don't worry. It doesn't matter, because they don't really matter anyway, but they're going to be used to bash people over the head with about 1900 years later. People are going to be called heretics for it, but don't worry, because it's not a big deal. That's not the divine revelation. The divine revelation is, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. He who does not believe is condemned. That's the divine revelation. And again, entrance into the church. There's no entrance. You yourself said baptism is the gateway. There's one gateway. There's not your desire is also a gateway, and then your martyrdom is another gateway. There's only one. The creed says remission of sin. There's one baptism for the remission of sins. Not 3 in 1. Not 3. There aren't 3 forms of the one baptism because they're not all sacraments. And everybody admits they're not sacraments. So you can be the lone man saying they're sacraments, but they're not. Nobody believes that.
Well, and just to be sure, I'm not claiming to have that answer.
No, and my point is you can't, and it's not your fault. You're never going to get it because it's not possible. They cannot be reconciled. The divine revelation is you need the water. You have to be born again of actual water. That's why Trent said, if anyone shall say real and natural water is not necessary for baptism, let him be anathema. So if you're saying baptism of blood is it's baptism without water, that is definitionally false. Baptism means to wash. It cannot mean my blood washes me. Blood is not used for washing. The sacrament has to signify the grace it affects and affect the grace it signifies. That's why water is the matter. That's why you can't use any other matter. So my blood can't wash my soul. I'm not washed in my blood. I'm washed in the water, and that's how I get Christ's blood. I don't get Christ's blood through my blood.
I do understand your position, and I understand why you think I'm being inconsistent. I think we've come to where we clearly disagree.
Well, I would challenge you to find out why, because eventually it's not enough to just be like, well, we just don't know. Like we do. Eventually it has to be rectified because we do know. And there's no reason to posit these things. If Christ can do all things, then anyone who needs baptism can get baptism. He doesn't need baptism of blood. He doesn't need baptism of desire. There's no reason to even come up with them.
Oh, I didn't come up with them.
No, but it doesn't matter. It's the fallible speculations of people, and it doesn't matter how holy they are. They're fallible. This is why even St. Thomas said you have to prefer the church over a doctor, no matter how holy and learned he is. We don't, and actually Pope Alexander VIII or 7th maybe condemned the Jansenists for saying whatever we find in Augustine, it's safe to hold no matter what the Pope says. That's a condemned heresy of Jansenism because it isn't safe to read anything Augustine said and then hold to it, because Augustine could have said something the popes don't agree with. So it's not safe to just look at what Augustine taught and what Cyprian taught and say, well, it must be the truth. It's not. They're not unanimous, and everybody admits they're not unanimous. So it cannot be ordinary magisterium. It doesn't rise to that level because they have to be unanimous on the teaching, and everybody knows they're not. They don't even agree on desire and blood between them. So they're not unanimous, and any particular fathers can be wrong, provably, because the popes have condemned as heresy the notion that you can just follow them and disregard what the Pope says. Well, if they were always in agreement with the Pope, that couldn't exist. That wouldn't be there. It would just be safe to follow them because they're never at odds with what the popes teach. But they can be at odds with what the popes teach. That's the problem. So I would challenge you to try to stop looking at the fathers and look at the popes. What do the popes teach about baptism of blood and desire? Is there any, you would think in 2,000 years, there'd be some ordinary teaching of the popes talking about this. There's nothing. Zilch. Especially even blood, especially the names. They don't mention them even by name, and they've had these names since the 200s. So for 1,800 years, there's not one. Even Trent, if you want to say that taught baptism of desire, it doesn't teach it by name. It doesn't have the name baptism of desire or baptism of blood. Neither does the Catechism.
Doesn't give a definition.
Doesn't give a definition. Doesn't tell you how it works. Doesn't tell you anything. And then the next chapter is there's only one instrumental cause, which is the sacrament. And then St. Peter Canisius, who was there, tells you that there's no remission of sins unless you are joined to the church by faith and baptism. And he's talking about the sacrament of baptism because that's the section he's in. So baptism of blood is not a sacrament, and neither is baptism of desire. So you can't have your sins remitted at all without the laver of rebirth. And that's why Pius, even down to Pius XII, is saying You're not a member of the church unless you've received the laver of rebirth, and that baptism is a washing that distinguishes all Christians from the rest, the stream of atonement. Well, it's not a stream of atonement for me to shed my blood. We're not, like, with all respect, like, we're not Jews. My sacrifice doesn't do anything. It has to be the sacrifice God gave us, which is water baptism. We're not the Holocaust time where I can offer up a person and spill their blood and that appeases God. That's paganism. And the Jews could cut the animal's throat and that appease God, but we're not at that point anymore.
And I understand what you're saying, but I don't see anyone making that argument. Nobody's actually making that argument.
That's irrelevant. If it's true, it doesn't matter if nobody else said it.
No, I mean making the argument that man can just shed his own blood and be saved that way. That's not what it is. That's not what anybody's saying.
No, but that's the means.
Well,
because everybody says it's God's grace.
Right.
Well, everything's God's grace. We don't exist without God's grace. So saying God's grace works through it is pointless and meaningless. God's grace works through anything to keep us alive at all. So the means of my salvation, if baptism of blood is true, is my death. That's the means. God's grace would work through it.
Right. I understand your argument. I'm just saying that's not an argument that any of the fathers will put forward by any means. That's not how they looked at it.
That's a problem then, because that's what it is. Because it's not baptism. I'm not being baptized in blood. I'm not getting water baptism. I'm not getting the sacrament. I don't have a sacramental character. There's no sacramental rite. There's no form. It wasn't given by Christ with all those outward signs. So it would be my death that has, in a way, bypassed the sacrament. Oh, I took the grace from the sacrament, but I didn't get the sacrament itself.
Right. And they say that, and that's not what they say. They say that it does supply the grace.
It supplies the grace, right? But so somehow I got the grace of a sacrament without obtaining the sacrament, and I changed my essence from an original sin, servant of Satan, to a born-again son of God without being born again of water.
Well, yeah, and they didn't look at the baptism of blood as like a hack or something. Is almost kind of how the way you're making it sound like to them it was a big deal. If you were martyred, you were selected by God for a great honor. Whether you're baptized or not.
Nobody's disagreeing with that.
Yeah, whether you were baptized or not. Right. And so to them, yes, if you were an unbaptized catechumen and you were martyred, that was a glorious and wonderful thing. And you by no means were lacking in the graces of the sacrament. And I think some of them may even say particularly that you're not even lacking in the sacrament specifically. So that's how they looked at it.
That's how very few of them looked at it.
Well,
most of them did, right, and most of them didn't believe that or say that.
Well, you can't say they didn't believe in it unless they specifically correct it. Then you're only speculating.
Well, then we're speculating they believed it. We either have evidence they believed it or we don't.
Right, and I'm talking about the ones that talked about it, not the ones that didn't.
No, but we don't have much evidence from all the people who were around then.
Right, the only evidence we have is that they held it in high esteem. That's the only evidence we have. We don't have any evidence that anyone ever rejected.
Well, no, if people didn't write it and didn't teach it, then we can't say, well, it's likely that they believed it. We don't have any evidence one way or the other. And again, when you add up the total number of theologians who've existed in church history, who have writings we still have access to, the majority of them didn't teach this stuff. It's a very, very small number compared to...
Yeah, and I think that's where our fundamental approach differs, is that to me, that we only have positive and we don't have explicit denials. And like I said, you can have exclusive sounding statements from people that also teach it. So an exclusive sounding statement, to me, doesn't carry weight. You'd have to have somebody correcting it. And I know we're not going to agree on that, but that's my position.
Right. Well, so then when Trent excludes it without saying that it specifically is excluded, that doesn't really exclude it for you.
I would see Trent as following into the same pattern as Augustine and the other fathers, in that it teaches that desire is possible in one place, and then talks about the exclusivity of baptism in another place.
So it's contradicting itself?
Sees no need to explain in that place why desire is also a factor. That is, to me, the common pattern from very early times all the way through up to the present. And like I said, the confusion on the other issues aside, of course.
Right.
But I'm only talking specifically about a catechumen. And to me, so baptism of desire would be, let's say, a Turk who is handling Catholic prisoners. He learns enough of the faith to meet whatever the minimum bar is of understanding, but he got an imperfect understanding of baptism. He deserts to go over to the Catholics and get baptized and to, become a Catholic. And he dies in the desert looking for the Crusader army because they maneuvered and he couldn't find him. That would be a person, he's making an extreme sacrifice of desire, could possibly be somebody who would be a candidate for that, not ignorant, but somebody who's seeking the faith.
No, but why?
That would be my understanding.
Right, but why? So God sees his need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why does God not get him baptized if he's sincere?
Yeah, and I understand that argument, and I don't doubt God's power to do. I'm just saying, to me, the historic evidence would seem to point to that the understanding is something along those lines, that there is a thing as baptism of desire. I believe Trent does teach it, and I believe the Catechism of Trent teaches it, and I believe it's been the common opinion, and it has never been specifically correct.
What is the purpose of it then? If you admit God doesn't need it, and we don't have clear teachings that prove it, because you keep saying there's all these holes and you don't have answers, and
right, but that doesn't mean I don't believe I'm convinced of it. I'm just saying,
I realize
I don't understand these things well enough to be able to answer your questions on.
No,
and you bring up some very good questions.
That's fair, but if it takes all this research, like this is the problem. How does it make sense that the church's teaching on salvation can be this complicated? It can be this muggy for 2,000 years. How does that make any sense?
Well, to me, I don't see it as a problem.
Why would it not be a problem? If everybody is fighting about it, there's been people disagreeing about it for a long time.
We don't
really know how anybody's saved.
And that's actually what I don't see, is I don't see people disagreeing about it in the past. I don't see anybody.
Because most people didn't teach it.
Yeah, right. But what I would need is Peter Canisius saying, these people over here that taught in this catechism that came out of the Council of Trent that there's baptism of desire, and they're wrong, and here's why. That's what I would need to see. And then I would say there people have been fighting and disagreeing about it. I don't see any disagreement, and that's my issue. You bring up questions I can't answer, points I don't think there's good answers to, but I don't see that there's a conflict or a problem. I just think that maybe all the little mechanics aren't necessarily clear to everybody. Maybe they don't need to be.
How can they? Why would they not need to be? We're talking about salvation.
I don't know. I mean, this theological
like how someone is saved is literally the most important question of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only reason you're here. So the fact that this idea that the church's position can be so milquetoast on, the fathers taught it. Popes didn't really say much about it, though. I think the Council of Trent taught it, but then it seemed to kind of say both things at the same time. Like, if that's the Catholic Church, it's not a clear guide. It's not leading you.
Which again is not my position.
Well, I mean, that's what you're
seeing, and I understand that you have some good objections, but to me, it has been historically, there's one historic teaching, and this is, like I said, a small issue, not a big issue. It's not even one that people have to necessarily understand to be Catholic. It's not clearly defined, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Maybe somebody can show me more clearly, but that there has never been conflict over. I have never seen any evidence of any of the people you're referring to correcting the Catechism of the Council of Trent or any other such work and saying that they are in error. And we already explained that. There's all kinds of religious works that were famous
that had errors that were not corrected.
Sure.
So that it doesn't prove anything. Like there were
and I understand that
Augustine wrote his own retractions, as you know,
mm-hmm.
and Aquinas, everybody,
right,
all the great doctors and theologians.
I was mentioning it to say that I don't see that there was any conflict over this issue. I don't see any evidence of conflict over this issue.
But again, that logically, like we have to think logically. Does that prove that it's true?
To me, it does. Yeah, the fact
no, not to
it's
you.
Positively taught and
not
never
to you
denied.
Subjectively, though. Logically, does it deductively, logically prove that it's true?
Yeah, to me, that is like that's what I'd call maybe. And you know, again, I might not be the best person to explain this, but like the circumstantial evidence. You've only got one kid in the house that's old enough to push the stool over to the counter and get the cookie out of the cookie jar. And you go to his bed, the jar's off the lid, his favorite stool's over there. There's crumbs in the bed, they're all over his face. You wake him up. You don't even have to ask him. You know,
right,
he got in the middle of the night.
That is induction. That's induction. I'm asking, logic is deductive. So your claim, does it deductively of logical certainty prove that your position's true?
Well, I'd have to get a dictionary out to answer that question.
Okay, but, like the basic laws. Like a basic law of logic.
I think I've made my position very clear, though, that I don't see a conflict over this. You'd have to show me.
It doesn't matter, though. It doesn't matter.
To me, it does. But to me, it does. Because if something's positively taught and it's never actively corrected, that is what I would call tacit approval of it. And yes, it is. And that to me gets back to your question about how can the church have, you know, this wishy-washy milquetoast position? And that's why I don't think it is, because it's been taught,
but we don't know anything about it.
The history of the church, and it's never been corrected. And it's in catechisms. Popes
we don't have any definitions. So when you say it's been taught, we don't even know what it is. There's no definition of what it is.
Sure.
So you have a lot of vague, various conflicting opinions about certain theological propositions
about baptism of desire. The baptism of blood, I think, is very clear. I mean, you are confessing Christ and you're being killed, and you are aligning yourself with the church and its beliefs, and you die for it. To me, that's a pretty clear. And then for the baptism of desire, it's somebody who's trying to join themselves to the true church.
Is that person who
to me, there's a lot more questions on that one, exactly how it works. But what is not a question to me is that it has never been specifically called false by anybody, but it has been in many catechisms.
Does it have to be called? Again, it's just, does it have to be said to be false in order for it to be false?
Not in a single one-off, but over the period of 2,000 years, yes. The fact that it's been taught throughout the history of the church and has never been corrected, to me, that proves
that it's true.
To me, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you keep saying to me. It's not about to me or to you. It's whether it's actually
true. I'm the only person I can speak for. I know there's other people that disagree with me.
No, that's subjectivism. We can make logical arguments that are not dependent on what we believe.
Sure, I understand what you're saying, but I'm just only going to speak for myself. How I see it. And forgive me if you don't like the way I'm phrasing it, but
no, it's not about that. I'm not asking you to speak for yourself. I'm asking you logically, deductive, provable logic.
Mm-hmm.
Does your claim prove that baptism of desire is the teaching of the church?
I hate to disappoint you, Alex, but I'm gonna have to say, in my opinion, it does. You know, and like I said, and
it's dodgy.
And I can understand that, you know, with your the objections that you're bringing up, I see why, you know, you're saying that to you, that doesn't make sense, right?
And it's not about to me. It's not about to me. We got to leave the subjectivity. That's modernism. It's not about what it is to me or what it is to you. So in your opinion, with respect, I don't care about your opinion. We're trying to figure out what the truth is.
Yes.
The truth that is independent of our opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So your claim that it was never corrected for all this time, logically, deductively, does that prove, independent of what you and I believe, that it's true?
In my opinion, it is a long-standing tacit approval that is worthy of acceptance by all. Does that help?
Okay. All right. Well, but then you could be wrong about that, right?
I could be wrong about a lot of things.
Okay. Well, then that's my point. Then
yeah,
that's my point.
That's why I'm trying to phrase it the way I am, is because
I get it. But that
I'm
means
just me. That's all I am, right?
I get it. Yeah. I get it. But that means that your position is not certain. You don't know. You can. So you're right now. You're making a case for what you think, which is fine, but you can't prove. You're admitting you can't even prove that it's true.
Well, I can't prove it if you don't accept my argument. Then you can reject that.
No, that's what my point is. I'm asking
but to
you.
Me, it's a slam dunk, and it should be accepted because it is the fact of 2,000 of years of history, and it has never been corrected. To me, that's part of the deposit of the faith.
I mean, yeah. So then why won't you say it's definitely true?
Well, I think I pretty much have. I guess I just
you keep saying, in my opinion. Like, is it true or not?
Well, yeah. I mean, in my opinion, it is. I apologize if you don't like that.
All right, we're gonna go to the question. I just
feel like to me, decorum demands me to say that because I'm not an authoritative figure.
No, but you just see this. But Ian, that's with respect. That's the same stuff the Novus Ordo people do. I don't have the authority to say that guy's not the Pope. You don't need the authority. Is he a Catholic or not? No, he's not.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, then he's not. So it doesn't matter about, do I have ecclesiastical standing? I don't need ecclesiastical standing to know that Bergoglio's not a Catholic. I don't have to qualify that with, well, in my opinion, he's not, but I could be wrong. No, I am infallibly certain that Bergoglio is not a Catholic. There is 0% chance that he is one.
Well, yeah, and well, maybe let me phrase it this way: if you can show me that there has been conflict, because that's what you said, there's been so much conflict over this. Show me the conflict, and I'm willing to say, you know what, I thought, but now I'm wrong. I'm willing to say that, but
you've already excluded that,
and so until then, I am forced to assume that this has not been an issue in the past. And that the arguments that you're bringing forward have not historically been things that people argued about. That because everybody believed you had to get baptized, Ian. That's what is the practice of the church? Is the practice of the church to assume someone is saved without baptism, or is it the practice to baptize everyone? Well, you acknowledge that people have throughout history taught BOD and baptism of blood.
What's the practice of the church? The practice of the church is not what a father said. That's not the
practice. And nobody's disputing that.
Okay.
Even the people that put forward baptism of blood and baptism of desire, they didn't dispute it either. So therefore, that's why to me it's not a objection that carries forth.
That's why there's no fighting, because none of the lay people were being taught this stuff. Were the lay people reading St. Augustine's treatises?
Oh, I don't know.
No, they weren't. There wasn't a printing press back then. Nobody had easy access to any of these early church father writings. So
some people did. Yeah. They were in the monasteries. Some people throughout times. I mean,
not the lay people.
Oh, wait a second. I got to object to this one. We're talking 2,000 years of history with varying levels of literacy. These works, Cyprian, Augustine, are widely known and studied.
Yeah, by lay
people.
Throughout
the history of the church, people have at various times and to varying degrees had access to this stuff, and the intelligentsia of the church has always discussed
issues. I'm talking about the laity. How many of the laity were reading the treatises of the fathers?
And that's what I just was addressing. It has varied throughout history, and I'm not even convinced the people that'll tell you they know. No, we don't know. We're talking continents over 2,000 years, millions, billions of people. To say that none of them were able to read it. The literacy.
I didn't say none of them.
But anyway, I think that's a side issue that I'm objecting to. What your point is about the laity, I'm not sure, but I'm just saying that
my point is that they're not being taught this. They were not being taught from the pulpit on Sunday by their pastor that, guess what? There's this theory about baptism of blood and desire, and it'll save people without water baptism. The laity aren't being taught that. They're being taught You must baptize everyone. You must bring your infant to the church to be baptized. So, I mean,
this is a tangent. I think that generally what you're saying is true, but you're making an assumption.
That's why there's no fighting. That's why there was no conflict. You're asking why there wasn't any conflict. It's because none of the lay people are going to bring this up like today, where now we have access to all the writings. That's why there's more fighting now, because I can read everything Augustine wrote in English. But back then, I didn't have access to all that. I couldn't Google what St. Augustine said last week and then criticize it.
And again, we don't know what the lay people were saying. But as far as the writings that we do have, there's zero evidence that anybody has ever said that this is error that I'm aware of. Historically, none. And that's what it would take for me to not believe that this is part of the deposit of the faith.
So it's an argument from silence.
No, I would assert that your position is an argument from silence, and that mine is positively proved, and that the silence of your position is what has in fact caused me to select.
What's the silence of my
desire is the teaching, the historic teaching of the church.
No, you've said repeatedly your main reason for believing this is because no one corrected it. That's an argument from silence.
It was positively taught.
No,
so
but
there you go. So the baptism of blood is not an argument from silence. It's positively taught.
No, but you said the main reason you hold to it
is not positively taught. Nobody says this is an error, and many things have been decried as error throughout the history of the church. It's a good portion of the history is the history of people arguing about what is and isn't error. That's a huge part of our heritage. And well, we're falling right in line. We're doing it now, right? So that is, I would say that you and not I are
what is my argument
has the position that is the argument from silence.
Well, how is my argument an argument from silence?
Because baptism of blood and desire have been positively taught throughout the history of the church without anyone calling it error.
That's not my position.
But that is my position.
No, but you said my position is an argument from silence. So how is my position an argument from silence?
To say that baptism of desire and blood are false, where nobody has ever positively asserted that.
That's not my argument. My argument is that water baptism is necessary for everyone because that's what Jesus taught.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so that's the position.
That people
baptism of desire and blood are not my position. It is I believe that when Jesus said you have to be born again of water and the Holy Ghost, that applies to everyone who has original sin. That's a positive argument. That's what he said. Your argument is we have to read into that and say, well, that also includes desire and blood, even though there's no water.
No, my argument is that the fathers, who are my betters, who I would not presume to correct, all have only positively, either they're silent on the issue or they positively teach it, and no one has ever corrected it. And they do have scriptural.
Wait, time out here. They're not silent.
That Augustine gave.
They're not silent. St. Peter Canisius and all these guys are not silent. They're positively saying everyone has to be born again of water. Yeah, you don't believe that's true.
And as I said, if they corrected,
it doesn't matter. This is the problem. It's about the logic.
I would say that they differ with it. I'm not convinced that Peter Canisius differs with it, because people positively make exclusive statements about baptism.
It wasn't just baptism.
It's not.
There's like 10 different. No, there's like 10 different angles to
assert the necessity of baptism, who also believes in baptism of blood and desire.
And there's no. It's not just about this. There's 10 different angles about this. There's church membership. There's remission of sins.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have.
So when St. Peter Canisius says there's no remission of sins,
your objections. But
but then that's the problem. That's the problem, because if St. Peter Canisius is teaching there's no remission of sins without water baptism, you have to say what? That he doesn't mean that, or that's not really, we have to read into that? What does that mean?
No, so I'll tell you exactly what I think about that. Many fathers say that and then turn around and also without seeing any inconsistency, also talk about baptism of blood. So I have no reason not to believe that he might not also fall into that camp.
Okay, so then let's follow.
Let me finish, please. Unless he specifically rejects that position, because there is a pattern of that historically. So, I do not accept that he rejects baptism of blood unless you can show me that.
Okay, then let's follow that logic then. If there can be remission of sins without water baptism, then is there remission of sins outside the church?
No.
Okay, so then all these people with BOD and BOB are inside the church, right?
Yes, they would have to be in some way.
When are they inside the church?
Good question. I would say that the martyr, at the time of the martyrdom, the BOD
at death. So he's not in the church the whole time he's being killed until he dies.
Yeah, not all the way in, because he's still a catechumen.
Okay, so at what exact point does he stop being outside the church and come into the church?
Good question. I mean, I see what you're saying. I could venture a guess, and I acknowledged up front. You've got a lot of good questions that I don't have answers for.
Because you already said at the beginning the at death thing doesn't work. So this man is not in the church this whole time until he dies, or it has to be right before he dies, because it can't be after he dies. So the whole time he's being killed, he's not a member of the church at all. But somehow, right before he dies, he's a member.
Well, and St. Cyprian is saying that they advance from the camp of the church. So they're catechumens of the church.
But they're not in the church. They all teach catechumens are outside the church. That's why there's the Mass of the catechumens and the Mass of the faithful.
And like I said, that's, it is a good question exactly how the mechanics work. And I cannot explain to you to your satisfaction, obviously, any of that.
And I'll put this to you then. There's a 0% chance that anybody in my camp is ever going to believe what you're saying if you can't explain how that works.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. And
if we're going to stand on, unless you can show me a quote where the Pope explicitly says baptism of desire is heresy, I don't have to believe it. Nobody on this side will ever be able to believe what you're saying, because you don't really have any answers. Like, you're asking us to accept things that you can't prove. Because everything I ask you is my opinion. This is what I think. None of us are interested in what lay people like us think. We're trying to do logical arguments to prove what does the church teach. Because I only want to follow what the church teaches. I don't care if every man on earth believes it's true. If it's not taught by the church, it's false.
Right. And I guess
I don't want to accept it.
And I would view the fathers as representative of what the church teaches. And that's why the arguments that I have put forward,
then they would have to have the answers.
I feel that represents the church's teaching.
They would have to have the answers then. And they shouldn't contradict themselves. But they do.
And they didn't see themselves as contradicting themselves.
No, they contradict themselves even on baptism of blood and desire. They don't even agree with each other on whether those are true or not.
Right. And I would say that they didn't view it that way.
They
did. You're saying that their statements were contradictory, but I don't see them saying that their statements are contradictory or accusing each other of that. So I think that they looked at it differently than you do.
No, you already admitted that some of the fathers exclude baptism of desire.
Yes, some of the statements would seem to.
Okay, well then baptism of desire can't be true.
Well, either that, or maybe there was difference of opinion on it in the early times. I know there was on other things that are settled dogmas now.
That muddies it even more. That means it's totally unknowable as to whether it's true. If we don't get a future pope, we can't know, because we have fathers disagreeing and contradicting each other.
We had issues like, did Mary die or just fall asleep, right? Like, there have been things that people have disagreed on in the history of the church.
Yeah, this is about salvation, though. This is about how you obtain.
No, I'm aware of that. Yeah,
this is not about the side issue about whether Mary died or not. So this is
that's a dogma. So I don't know if it's that much of a side issue. I mean, it's a dogmatic It's been dogmatically defined now, but it was lately dogmatically defined. Historically, there's been different views on it. And so I'd say that maybe that
but we don't have any definitions for these things.
Right.
So
but what I'm trying to say is that because we had people disagreeing in the first 4 or 5 centuries on whether it was just baptism of blood or baptism of desire, doesn't necessarily mean that baptism of desire is false. And then also, I think it's also worth saying we don't know for a fact that they disagreed on it, because we have lots of records of early fathers disagreeing about stuff. They'd write all about it and go after each other like bulldogs sometimes. And I don't see any history that people were disagreeing on it. So it could well be that the evidence that we have that we think they might disagree, that maybe they didn't actually disagree and we're misinterpreting that. I think we need to just admit that to ourselves, because without positive evidence that they disagreed, we're assuming that. And I think it's easy to assume stuff about the fathers and be wrong.
Right. But so you don't think any of the statements by the fathers exclude baptism of blood and desire? There's no statement they could make that would prove to you they're excluded unless they actually say baptism of desire and blood are false.
Yeah, and the reason for that is many of the fathers that teach baptism of blood make statements that if you didn't know they made the other statement, it would sound like they're excluding it, but then they can turn around and without any explanation include it. So therefore, the other fathers that make exclusive statements, they might have made inclusive statements and we just don't have a record of them. And that's just me trying to not read too much into them, because it is such a temptation to read things into the fathers that's not there. I'm sure I've done it on many occasions. I try to avoid it.
That's fine. I'm curious about this. Then we're going to go to questions. Do you think baptism of blood or desire applies to infants?
No.
And why is that? Because nobody taught that, or God can't do that, or why do you think that?
Well, I don't know. I guess maybe baptism of blood would. They talk about the holy innocents as being martyrs by blood.
That could happen for babies today.
Being martyred for the faith. I don't know. I don't know. I guess it could be. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that's why this is such a big issue, because it's very explicitly de fide that infants have no other remedy except the sacrament of baptism. They're not saved any other way. And this is the problem, because people start accepting that. And now I know people who think babies can just be saved whenever God wants, because we can't rule it out. We don't really know what he does. And the reason they get to that point is because they reject the divine revelation on baptism. They don't think that's the line. They think there is really no line. And if you reject the line on baptism, it's like Protestantism. You don't have any way to reject anything else. Because there are fathers then and other people who teach later, you don't need faith in Jesus. Well, we don't believe that. Why? Because the fathers said they need faith? Well, that's not exclusionary. They can say they need faith, but they could also say they don't need faith. That's their exact same argument. And then they say that they don't need faith. And then they move on to, well, but at least they got to follow the natural law. It's like, well, no, because you can have someone writing that you must follow the natural law, but then they could also write you don't need to, and it's compatible. And then before you know it, you're Bergoglio. So that's the problem. Like every argument you just made for baptism of blood, people make for no faith in Christ. Because people later, or statements they made in other places, seem to contradict that. So we can just kind of have both. You can't have them. No, I see what you're saying, but that's certainly not my position. Any of that other stuff that you're asserting.
No, it doesn't matter.
You're saying it's a slippery slope, and it can lead to these other things.
It logically, of necessity, can. Because Christ didn't say what you're saying. He said you have to be born again of water, and that's it. But then we say, well, we have to understand what that means. That means somehow desire and blood are in there, but they're not baptism. And then everybody else comes along and says, well, maybe faith really doesn't mean explicit faith. Maybe it means everything in the Bible when he says, believe in me, maybe that really means that they can believe it like in their heart in a way. They don't really have to know he's the Messiah. And that's what happens. And that's not what Christ taught. But they'll redefine it and say, well, but other people said here, like, if you pray, St. Alphonsus said, if you pray, you'll be damned. And if you pray, you'll be saved. If you don't, you'll be damned. Well, look at that. That means you don't need water baptism. You don't need faith. You can just pray. We have to make sense of that with everything else he said. So maybe you can just pray. It's like, this is what everybody does. And it's, well, why are you doing that? Well, because this guy said it. This doctor and saint said it. This theologian said it. This is what all the Novus Ordo people do. All the cardinals.
And I'm not trying to develop any doctrine off the positions. And you're asking me the question about, can infants be martyred? And I brought up the holy innocents. I'm not trying to posit any doctrinal position. And I already said coming in, I don't have all the answers into neat packets on this. I admit that. But I'm just saying that I need to see patristic evidence for a position, and I don't see any for baptism of desire ever being attacked. Now,
don't you see evidence from them though saying you need the sacrament, that everybody needs the sacrament?
Yes, and as I have said, they will say that and then not skip a beat and later on talk about baptism of blood and or baptism of desire and feel no need to explain because they don't see, and to my knowledge, nobody saw a conflict where you're seeing a conflict in the past. And that's what I'm asking
your argument then. Your argument then is there is no conflict. So being martyred,
not in the way that the fathers looked at it, it doesn't appear to be. Now, the questions that you're raising, I'm not saying are without merit. There's good questions that I can't answer, and I don't think a lot of people have good answers for them.
No, but following what you think the church's position is, then you believe there is no ultimate difference as far as the salvific effect of desiring baptism explicitly, being martyred for the faith, or actually getting water baptized. You think all of those lead to the exact same salvation?
Well, there are different levels, right? There's the parable where Jesus talks about the 20-fold, the 100-fold, and the 60-fold.
No, I mean, they're all going to get you to heaven. They're all going to. They're not of equal merit, but they're all going to get you to heaven.
Everyone that's saved is saved.
No, but by desire,
but the martyrs. So a baptism of blood would actually be, according to the fathers, a more glorious.
No, yeah, I'm not talking about degree of merit.
Baptized.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that though. I'm asking, you think that desiring the sacrament.
Well, you asked me if there was no difference.
No, but I'm clarifying. That is a difference. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm clarifying. Mm-hmm. You think that desiring the sacrament but never receiving it and dying in that state will get you to heaven, and also receiving the sacrament of baptism itself and dying in that state will get you to heaven. And you think never receiving the sacrament of baptism but shedding your blood for the faith will also get you to heaven. That's what you believe.
So the only one out of those three that's 100% would be the martyr, because he's dead. You can get water baptized and go to hell. Being water baptized is not a guarantee of salvation. And baptism of desire, to me, is even more tenuous. Yeah, the person who is martyred.
No, I'm saying people who actually receive them. If someone actually gets all three of those, they're all going to go to heaven.
Not necessarily. I'm saying that the baptism, the desiring baptism.
No. If they die in that state, if you get water baptized and you die in that state, you
get water baptized and you drop over dead immediately.
Right.
Yeah. Then at that point, if you've not committed any sin clearly,
right,
then you're saved. The martyr receives a more glorious crown, would be my understanding, and that would be explicit by many fathers that would apply to a person that was martyred before baptism, that was a catechumen of the church. So more glorious than the person who gets baptized and has a coronary heart attack or whatever, strokes out and dies right then and there. They haven't had a chance to commit sin, they're saved. If you get baptized and live out your life, you may or may not be saved. There's no guarantee just because you're baptized. And I'm sure we agree on that. You're not once saved, always saved.
Right. No.
Because you're baptized. And the baptism of desire has been taught, the mechanism, how all that works, how tenuous is it?
That's what I mean.
One person or 100 or how many, if anybody? I can't say. I'm just saying that
we don't even know.
Never been correcting. That's all
We
I'm
don't
saying.
even know when baptism of desire happens.
Exactly. I think it's a good question. How does it work?
I mean,
when does it happen?
yeah, but see, this at the beginning, you said this at death stuff isn't legit, but now you're arguing for at death martyrdom and at death baptism of desire.
Yeah, and so I can clarify that. So the at death, I'm talking about people that accept the faith somehow at death for invincibly ignorant people.
Why couldn't they accept the faith at death?
Because they didn't already accept it in life. Yeah.
So even before they die, they couldn't accept it?
I suppose they could, but is it that they're gonna change their mind in that last second? I guess they could.
Well, see, that's what I'm seeing. This is the problem. See, look where we're getting now. This means then the pagan on the island who isn't going to be a martyr, didn't ever do anything with the church like a catechumen did. But if somehow an angel tells him what to do in the moments before he dies, I believe in Jesus and all the essential mysteries. Now he is saved by baptism of desire?
I don't see any patristic evidence for that. Anybody
Why not?
And I'm not asserting it, nor any of the fathers.
No, but
what I thought we were just discussing was the mechanism, which I freely admit I don't even pretend to know. So we're having, in my opinion, a theoretical discussion.
No, it is, yeah.
About a catechumen. Yeah,
that's
everything I've seen from the fathers, they only talk about baptism desire, baptism of blood, as we discussed earlier, is only discussed in the context of people coming to the church for salvation, full stop. That's all I've ever seen any evidence for. The idea of the pagan on the island, having the angel come to him and all that, I don't see any evidence for that in any historic
document. That's what Aquinas said.
Aquinas said that somebody could have an angel sent to him. I think it's quite a leap to say that that angel is going to catechize somebody at the moment of death and all that. And I don't think that was Aquinas's intent. Now
he didn't say that's not what he meant, though. So we don't know. We'd have to leave that up to speculation.
But that's the opposite of my argument. My argument is that there's a positive statement that has never been positively denied. So that would not. I see what you're saying, but that's not. I would say that that's not my position.
I know. This is the problem, though, Ian. Is it has been denied. You just don't accept it because you are. This is what Deuterocomical did too. He arbitrarily rules out any exclusive statement. So this is gonna the count.
And I understand that, but I have answered that repeatedly. Why we disagree on that?
I know, right? It doesn't work though because the councils and stuff and the popes are infallible. So if they tell you this is how something is, does that mean you think there could be exceptions?
I would understand that in the way the church has always understood it, which is that does not necessarily exclude BOD and baptism of blood.
Right. See, that's a huge problem because that means what the council is actually saying isn't what it's really saying. You have to interpret.
And I would, of course, disagree with that assertion because nobody who was believing that was ever corrected and pointed to the council. Show me somebody who makes your argument more than 200 years ago.
People after the council are not the council. It doesn't matter if they agree with it or not.
But
they're not the arbiters of our faith.
Our
proximate rule of faith is the magisterium, not what people say about the council.
Right. But okay. I would really.
I'm asking a principled question of when you read a dogmatic definition or a dogmatic council, if it says something, again, like we'll pick a different example. When it said in Canon 2 on baptism that if anyone shall say real and natural water is not necessary for baptism, let him be anathema. Does that mean that is there any possibility then that a matter other than water could be used for baptism?
I would say that is the common understanding of the church, that is.
No, I'm saying because that's defined now. If anyone later says, you know what I think Trent meant was you could also use wine to baptize people, would you know for certain that's false, or would you have to go, well, maybe Trent did mean that?
Right. And my challenge to you is show me somebody Trent was 500 years ago. Show me somebody since then that has used that argument to point out that the catechumen.
It's a principled question. You're not answering the question with respect, because it's
with respect, I will answer it. Yeah, I believe.
So if the council says this is the thing, if anyone shall say that real and natural water is not necessary for baptism, let him be anathema. Does that mean there is any chance whatsoever that there is another matter other than water that can be used, or is it absolutely excluded?
I believe that that statement is meant to be understood as the church has always understood it, which would be that BOD and baptism of blood.
I'm not asking about whether, I'm not asking about that.
But you asked me the question, please allow me to answer it. Yeah, that is not going to be a problem for anybody because it has always been understood that way. And you can't show me anybody that had a problem with it when they put the catechism out and please let me finish. The catechism was put out and circulated all throughout Christian Europe and all over the place, and nobody made the argument that you're currently making. Now, I'm not saying your argument is illogical.
You're not answering my question. Right, I'm asking about the matter of the sacrament. I'm not asking about BOD.
Sure.
That canon is defining.
Yeah,
the matter of the sacrament. No.
Nobody raised this objection when the Catechism of the Council of Trent,
you're not listening to my question,
clearly teaches BOD.
And you're not.
Nobody made that objection. I am listening to you. I'm just saying
you're not. I'm not asking you about BOD. I'm not even getting into that issue. I'm using this to make a separate. I'm trying to figure out if when you read the council, can you read it and accept it, or do you have to reinterpret it based on what other people say? So that canon is talking about what matter you have to use for the sacrament. So do you believe that you could use a different matter, or does it absolutely have to be water because that's what Trent defined?
Yeah, I have no problem with what it's defining there. I'm just saying that the argument you're making doesn't stand up to the test of history. People in the time of Trent didn't see it that way, and they were not dumb, they were not illogical, and they did hold the faith. And
so you think you can use a different matter? You think you can baptize without water?
I'm not saying that.
Well, okay, then that's what I'm asking you. That canon defined that you need real and natural water for baptism. So can I read that then and say that means there is no other matter I can use, or do I read that and go, well, maybe there's a chance I could use a different matter?
Yeah, it's very clear. Your point is well taken.
Okay.
But your objection lacks any historical basis. That's
all right. You're leaving.
I'm not saying that you're not arguing well, that you don't have a logical point, that yes, there's baptism, but then with real and natural water, but these other two would seem to conflict with that. I'm not saying that you don't have a point there. You do. It's a good point. But the fact is that nobody in history raised that objection, even while the Catechism of Council of Trent, St. Robert Bellarmine's Catechism, all these ones that taught BOD, and nobody's going, hey, St. Robert Bellarmine, you're wrong. And here's why. Because this canon says it has to be real and natural water, so therefore you're wrong. You have to show me that people made that argument historically, or else we'll assume that we are looking at things in a way that the church has not historically looked at, because there's no historic basis for it. That's why.
Okay, so that's not the argument I was making with bringing up that point. I wasn't talking about baptism of desire.
I am. Sorry for interjecting it there.
It's about, this question is about whether you can read something in the council and know for certain that, well, okay, any other example, pick any other, when they define that the Blessed Mother had no original sin in Pius IX's encyclical, does that mean there is even the slightest chance that she actually did have original sin?
Well, of course not.
Okay, see that's so why is it so obvious for that? But then when it's other dogmatic statements, we suddenly do you need to read what the theologians said about the Immaculate Conception?
So, but
no, please. If Pius IX made that definition, do you have to care at all about what anybody else?
Can I address your objection with the Immaculate Conception?
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah. So, is there So with the Immaculate Conception, there's not really an equivalency to baptism of blood and baptism of desire with Immaculate Conception.
I know that's not what I'm asking you, though. I'm asking you, since Pius IX defined it, do I have to even care what any theologian said about it before or after? Or can I know for certain, based on his definition, that it's true, regardless of what anybody else says now?
Yeah, and I think maybe that this is really hitting at the heart of the issue, is that yes, I believe that we do. Language itself can be very dicey. The human mind can be very deceptive, and that we do have to look at the not any particular person, but the history of what people have thought and taught as a whole, even to understand something that's very clearly a clear statement. So a very clear, very basic statement still has to be seen in the bigger context of what everybody has taught and thought about in the church that has never once been disputed. Absolutely.
And what that sounds like to me is collectivism. Okay, because it doesn't matter what anybody else said.
And I would disagree. I would say that the canon of St. Vincent, that you have to accept what is everywhere, always, and by all been taught, is what I'm talking about. That's
not the question. The question is, when Pius IX defines infallibly that the Blessed Mother had no original sin, do I have to read or care to find out in order to find out if that's true or not, do I have to read what the theologian said about that at the time period and after him? Or can I read his definition and go, amen, that is absolutely true and it cannot be false?
Well, yes and no. You have to understand it the way the church has always understood it. You can take a statement and believe that it's absolutely true, and your understanding can be dead wrong.
Yeah, and I'm in my argument in this example, I am agreeing with what Pope Pius IX defined. I'm not inventing my own belief.
How do you know that? The only way you know that
we just went full steam into total relativism. I can ask you the exact same thing. How do you know? How do you know?
I would say that your position is perhaps. Well, I would say everybody needs to be careful not to fall into relativism.
And your
position is no more secure than mine.
You just undermine everything you just said.
Cutting yourself off from this massive body of teaching and saying, I don't care what any of these people said, when in fact it's an organic continuity that he is a part of. And so you have to be sensitive to all that. And it's not in the sense of, oh, we can redefine it and you're a girl if you want to be today. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that the Immaculate Conception is a concept that was around long before Pius IX, right? It's a truth. It's a truth. He was just reaffirming what the church had always taught.
Yeah,
so yes, what the church had always taught precedes what he's saying, and we darn well better look to it and understand it.
I know you're not addressing the question, though.
I am addressing the question.
You're not, because it's not about
you. I think you like the way I'm doing it.
I'm not arguing that the church didn't teach it before him. It's if I read the definition that he gave,
you are 100% capable. I have faith that you are 100% capable of reading any dogmatic definition and interpreting it wrong. I believe that you are totally capable of that, and I confess that I am as well.
So then everything, this whole thing has been a waste then, because you could be totally misinterpreting every father you're reading, every quote you think teaches baptism of blood. You could be totally misinterpreting it and be totally wrong.
Well, and that's why I always preface that this is my opinion on it.
Well, I mean, I really hate that it had to come to that, because it's like, we can't know. Everything you just argued for the last 2 minutes is you could misinterpret it all. Well, that would mean everybody could. So we can't know. We're trapped in total subjectivity. We can't even know.
We're not trapped in subjectivity because we have the witness, the consistent witness.
You could be wrong.
History.
You could be misinterpreting all that.
Well, I could, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. That's what you're
not going to know. You could have a totally false idea about it. You could have the whole thing you think about baptism of blood could be a total misinterpretation. You even thinking that it's historical could be totally wrong.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, well, but see, there you go. So then you trust that, but you can't read the definition and trust that. That's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you when Pius IX.
I've already told you, yes, I can.
No, when Pius IX defines the dogma, if I accept that and say, yes, amen, is it possible that that definition is false, or is it 100%
Well, I'd say one indication that the definition's not false, but your understanding of it may be false.
That's not what I'm asking you.
If you see it as conflicting what all the fathers have taught.
I'm not asking you about my interpretation. I'm asking you, is there any chance that when the Pope defines something, that it could be wrong?
No, of course not.
Okay, but thank you.
But I believe that
we're not trapped in subjectivity.
That you or I could understand it wrong or misapply it, right? And especially if we see all the fathers who have never been corrected as disagreeing with it, that's a good indication that we're not understanding it perhaps in its fullness or correctly.
No, but again, you could be misinterpreting all that.
I don't think so. I think I'm, there's enough evidence that you can be pretty certain nobody has ever corrected baptism of blood. Nobody.
Ever. How do you know? But see, this is the problem. This level of skepticism, you couldn't get past. Like, I could just keep doubting it. It wouldn't matter because I can't read the dogmatic definition and just accept it. I can't hear the words of Christ and just say, yes. I have to read into them and go, well, I know he said water, but that really means my own blood. And that
well, I would suggest this, that the fact that no one else sees the discrepancy, nobody historically sees the discrepancy and the conflict that you do, to me would suggest that you're not understanding it correctly, and that all these fathers who were never corrected and never criticized were correct, and that they saw no conflict in it where you see a conflict. And that's why I challenged you to say, show me someone historically that has seen the objections that you're raising.
You've already admitted they don't even agree with each other. So you're arguing for something that you yourself can't defend. There's no consistent argument.
But the type of disagreement, it's not true that the type of disagreement that I was discussing rises to the level that you're putting it at. There were some fathers that express things differently. They may or may not have held to all the same positions on it, but that doesn't throw the whole teaching out because there was some disagreement. That would be like saying that, oh, because some people thought that Mary fell asleep and others thought that she died, that the whole teaching needs to be scratched. No.
Here's the problem. Something is either true or it's false. Okay, there's no middle ground here.
No, I agree with that.
Either the church has literally always believed that this is the divine revelation, that Jesus's divine revelation to the apostles was, you can be saved by water baptism, by martyrdom, or by desire for baptism if you're a catechumen. That's either what Jesus taught or it isn't.
Yeah, and I'm saying that is what was taught, and that there may have been some disagreement in the early years about some of the points of it, and that wouldn't be the only doctrine. There's many doctrines that were disputed during that time period that were way bigger issues than this. So the fact that there was some disagreement, I don't think it's fair to characterize that as, oh, and so I'm being inconsistent by the fact that I'm relying on the witness of the fathers. The witness is not just the early fathers, but the entire church history has never questioned baptism.
So then you do believe that the divine revelation is you can be saved either by water baptism, martyrdom, or desire for baptism. That's what you believe Jesus taught. That is the truth of Catholicism.
Yes, and I said that, I thought at the outset, I thought I made that clear.
You've been saying it's your opinion and stuff. You've been saying to me and in my opinion.
Right. My opinion, I assumed would be understood to represent what I in fact believe. I should have been more clear. I apologize.
No, but I'm not asking you if you believe it. I'm asking you what the church teaches.
Well, that is what I believe the church teaches, yes.
Okay, so could you be wrong about that or no?
I don't believe so. Like you asked Deuterocanonical,
there you go.
Well, what if a future pope came and defined it? Well, right. The whole reason we reject the Vatican II popes is because they taught contrary to what all the fathers taught. So we knew that they weren't teaching what is true.
They taught contrary to the magisterium.
which is one with the fathers. It's the same thing. It's
But everything a father said is not consistent with the magisterium. That's
why
why
I didn't say it was. That's
my point.
That is not my point. Is that everything the one particular father said? That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
So we've got the bones, the blood, the muscles. I think the Bible's the bones. You know, you could say the heart's the Pope, whatever, the brain. You've got all these different parts. It's all one. And that's what I'm saying. You don't have any part of the body pointing to baptism of blood going, this is a false teachment. And unless you have that, then I have to conclude that your objections, valid as they be, and questions which need to be answered are true questions. It's not enough to say that it's inconsistent and that it conflicts with these dogmatic statements.
So if we did
nobody who's more educated and closer to the source than me ever said that it conflicts with a dogmatic statement, I would not presume to hold that.
Okay, so if we did get a pope who said, if anyone shall say that baptism of desire and blood can take the place of water baptism and give you the grace without the sacrament, let him be anathema, you would say that's an anti-pope?
I'd at least give him a chance and hear his explanation.
No, that's what he says. He issues a solemn anathema.
But he doesn't give any explanation. I guess I probably would have to.
Okay, I mean, we'll go to questions then. Let's see if anybody has any questions. Let's see. If you have questions, put them in there now. I'll go back to the top and see if anybody has said anything at this point. Thank you, everybody who's been here. Let's see. Rosary was here. Joan. Archbishop. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. I know there were a few questions, but they were a little while back, so let me try to find them. Bear with me.
You got
it. Yeah, I thought there was one before that. Oh, Rosary, here we go. I have a question for later before I forget. Where Rosary of Roses says, where did the following idea come from? That people can be united spiritually to the church, but not visibly and be saved in this way?
That's a good question.
Well, and it is what you're arguing for, sadly, because someone with baptism of desire is not visibly joined to the church. They're not a visible member because they haven't partaken of any visible things. So you also are arguing for that, which we didn't even get to, which is the visibility of the church requires that they all receive water baptism. Otherwise, we can't even know if they're Christians or not.
Well, and what about the a child who was the Eastern Orthodox baby that was
baptized? They're visibly baptized. That's a visible sign. They get the Catholic rite and they are baptized, so they are visibly a Catholic. The BOD person is not visibly a Catholic, and they're never visibly a Catholic ever, even when they die. This is all an invisible transfer of now they're a member, but none of us can even know they're a member because they have no outward sign. So that even also denies the dogma.
Even though they're in an Eastern Orthodox church.
No, I'm not talking about the baby. I'm talking about a grown-up who receives the baptism of desire you've been describing. They never visibly join the church. There's nothing visible about them joining the church. No matter when it happens, no matter what the mechanism ends up being or how it works, they never visibly join the church. So that denies the dogma of the visibility of the church. The church is visible by definition, and they're visible because of the sacraments. So you're arguing that someone who never partakes of the sacraments, who's never part of the visible society of the church, is somehow a member.
All right. Well, apparently I am past my curfew. My wife's let me know I've got to go to work tomorrow, and I'm going to be
grumpy,
gone for a little while. So she wants to spend a little time with me, and I apologize. I was really looking forward to the question and answer. But
it's my fault because we went on too long. I was going to get to them sooner, so I'll keep answering them, and you can see them.
Yeah, and I will definitely come into the comments if anybody has any questions for me, because when you post it as a video, there will be comments allowed, I presume.
Oh yeah.
Okay. If anybody has anything specifically for me, I'll chime in. And I just want to say I knew we'd come to a disagreement on this, and I think we both knew that coming in. I'm just glad it wasn't a debate for starters. And I really appreciate you having me on. And
I appreciate your honesty and your candor and being here.
And likewise. And I really appreciate your podcast. And I will definitely look forward to seeing your next one. And may God bless you and keep you and take care.
Yep. Thanks, Ian.
Bye-bye.
Yep. All right. We're going to hang out, guys. Let me get to some more questions. So yes, Rosary, I don't know exactly where that idea comes from, but there was definitely a more modern push to start making this distinction of you're spiritually in the soul of the church, but not the body. And we didn't get to that in this discussion, but only water baptism makes you a member of the body of the church. And so all this stuff about martyrdom and desire, making you part of the body, there's no teaching for that. Let's see. Yeah, Lefebvre was a proponent of BOD. Yep, he was. God can give actual grace. Yes, and we went over that last time, my last live stream. We're only even alive because he gives us actual grace. We can only even desire to convert because of the actual grace. So unfortunately for this discussion, it's like God leaves them there. Like he gives them enough grace to desire to be Catholic, but then he doesn't give them enough grace to actually get baptized, which is apparently it's a thing because some of the fathers said that. So it's unfortunate. Is it the position of this channel that holding to BOD and BOB is heretical and separates one from the church? Good question, St. Anthony Padua Radtrad. It definitely can be. If you know, like at this point, like if I were to say that baptism of desire is true, I would be lying because I know it's not true. I know the dogmatic teaching does not allow for it. And this is a distinction that I was trying to get at with Ian. Maybe I didn't do a good job. But when Trent defines there's only one instrumental cause of justification, and it's the sacrament of baptism, I either accept that or I don't. And that's either true or it's false. If it's false, then there's no point to Catholicism. Like if Trent can be wrong about that, or we have to try to understand that in the greater context of all of Catholic history, then the definitions themselves at these councils and from the popes are not really what we're following. We don't have to follow them as they're declared because we always have to kind of evaluate them based on what history did and what the theologians talked about. And because there's inevitably going to be disagreement, as Ian admitted, the church fathers butted heads sometimes on things. There's not going to be perfect agreement on everything, especially from theologians. And so that means we're kind of left in a nebulous world where we have a lot more freedom to pick and choose things at that point. And that's not how the faith has worked throughout history. It's not the teaching on the papacy. When the popes define something, it is absolutely true. There's no chance it could be false, and it doesn't matter what anybody else said on the matter. It doesn't matter how many people before them doubted it or denied it. It doesn't matter how many people after them doubt it or deny it. We know that the Pope, in that exercise of his office, cannot be wrong. So that's we don't believe that, then we're not Catholics and we can't know anything. So yeah, to answer your question, St. Anthony Padua Radtrad, it can be heretical because if you know what the truth is and you obstinately refuse to accept it, then yeah, that's heresy. So I think people can be confused on it, especially some of the stuff that Ian was talking about, like with baptism of blood. If you're more confused because you think some of the fathers, taught that and you don't see how it could be wrong, you're not necessarily being obstinate, but there does come a point where if you've seen enough of the dogmatic evidence and it's true, your conscience is telling you that it's true, and you just don't want to accept it, then yeah, now you're going to start getting into the heresy realm, and you're going to get into the realm of just mortal sin of denying the known truth, which is a sin against the Holy Ghost. Water baptism is the only way inside the church. Yep, that is true. That's the issue. Ian kind of admitted that, where it's the gateway, but then he tried to argue that the other two are the same gateway, even though they're a different means, which again doesn't make any sense. And there's no dogmatic teaching to affirm that. There's no magisterial teaching to affirm that. He didn't even claim it was part of the ordinary magisterium, which is kind of interesting, because a lot of people do. And I think he's right to say it's not, though, because it's definitely not. Let's see. We cannot make our own requirements for why a doctrine is true or false. That's true. We have to look at what the church teaches. There are many things the church does not explicitly condemn, but we reject. Yep. Whenever the Pope settled an issue, St. Augustine would say, end of discussion. Yep. Was there any? Oh, yeah. Okay. This is internal stuff. Yeah, the criminal thing, like the Pope Leo thing, that was a little surprising to me, because if it really is true that you can be saved without water baptism by these other means, if the Pope doesn't tell you that and he gives you the impression that you can only be saved by water, then that's definitely a huge problem, because everyone's going to follow the Pope. They're not going to assume that he's wrong. They're not going to assume that they need to like very carefully ascertain whether he's telling the truth or not. And so giving that false impression would be very detrimental to people. It would make them think falsely the only way they could be saved is to be water baptized. So I don't see how Pope St. Leo the Great would not be negligent if that's the real teaching and he knew it and he had understood it, because he's well after all this stuff was talked about. Then I don't know how he could, in his official works and letters, he's just giving people the wrong impression. It's like, well, usually what happens here is the papacy gets jettisoned, sadly. What the popes actually teach with their authority, people actually doubt, and it's not clear. And, but then the stuff that the fathers or the saints or the theologians teach is super clear and they can totally understand it. And we're going to go with that instead. And of course, the words of Christ just seem to not be explicit enough either. Catechism of Pius X. Yeah, we can get into that. It's not. It's a local catechism. It's not magisterial. So now I have to read it again to see exactly what it says, but we're trying to stick to the older stuff. Find it hard to believe this supposed error would be missed and not pointed out to the Saint Pope, and that he would continue to allow its use without correction. I don't know why that's hard to believe, St. Anthony Padua Radtrad, because Pius X is admitting that he's already surrounded by modernists. So I'm not sure why it's hard to believe that if somebody tampered with that catechism, that they wouldn't have informed him. And again, that's assuming that what it says is even necessarily wrong. The Catechism of Pius X does seem to have that error, but then it does seem to contradict itself. The whole first question before that is baptism necessary for salvation? And so what these people are getting at is that's not incompatible with BOD and BOB. And they just have to assert that. There's no proof of that claim. They just have to say, well, but look, like nobody corrected them. It's a giant argument from silence. There's been so many things that theologians and saints and fathers have written over the years that are not true, that nobody ever corrected them on. Like nobody explicitly told them you're wrong. Nobody later condemned them by name for something. Again, like I said, the Summa was not corrected. And you could go back through a lot of the fathers' works. Like by the time you get to the 1800s, you could go through a lot of the writings of the early church people and find things that are erroneous. And nobody went back and told everybody else at the time, hey, when you read Augustine or when you read Aquinas or when you read, St. Anselm, here's all these errors they made. So make sure you don't believe these things, like it wasn't done. And it wasn't done because the task is physically, practically speaking, impossible. You would have to go through so many things and correct so many things based on what the magisterium knew at that point, what had been defined. It's not tenable. That's why we don't follow. That's not our proximate rule of faith. What did the magisterium give us? There's one instrumental cause of justification. John 3:5 is a literal dogma. Unless you're born again of water and the Holy Ghost, you cannot enter the kingdom of God, is affirmed, I think, at least 3 or 4 times, even in Trent by itself. It is a solemn dogma, Council of Florence. There's only one gateway, the sacrament of baptism. We cannot, as the truth says, enter into the kingdom of heaven without being born again of water and the Holy Ghost. That's what's dogmatically affirmed every time they deal with this. It does not tell you that you can be saved by martyrdom or desire alone. And they'll say, no, it's with God's grace. Obviously, everything good requires God's grace. So does baptism, water baptism. So it means nothing to say, no, they're saved by desire and God's grace. Obviously, because the efficient cause of justification is the God who gives grace gratuitously. So the argument over here is not, hey, you can be saved without God's grace. No, that's not the claim. So it's saying God's grace would save you by your desire is meaningless. It has no relevance to proving the argument one way or the other. Yeah. There's 7. Yeah, I know. 7 sacraments. I know these are not sacraments. That was weird because none of the defenders of this even claim that they're sacraments. They're not connected. They're not sacramental rites. Yeah, I know, Rosary. Yeah. And I don't want to pretend like this isn't like a thing that people question. Like it obviously is, but the simple faith here is always seemingly tossed by the wayside. Like Jesus Christ's own words are just not good enough. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. They just, for some reason, people just cannot hold to that. It's just, and we see with his position, he's admitting the whole time that I know there's problems and it's kind of, up in the air and it's kind of, what did he say? There's loose ends, right? So that the church's teaching on salvation has loose ends. And it's like, well, no, there's only loose ends because you're questioning it. It's like, well, no, it's because being born again of water doesn't happen if you have baptism of desire. There's no water. You're not born again of water. It's like, so it's almost gaslighting. And I'm not saying Ian was doing that like on purpose or anything, but it is like a gaslighting kind of thing where it's like, no, like everything's totally compatible. You're like, well, didn't Jesus say you have to have water to be born again? And now you're saying this desire person, they don't have any water. Yeah, no, but you get the grace. Okay. Without the water? Yeah, without the water. Okay, then you don't think everybody needs the water. Yeah, no, I guess some people don't. It's like, okay, exactly. So it's not compatible with Christ's direct words. He didn't say some of you don't need to be born again of water. He said, unless a man is born again of water, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. I don't know. It's like, that's not good enough for most people. They have to find a way. They have to find a way around that. Yeah, God has ordained we are not saved unless we're baptized. Exactly. That's because he believes the divine revelation is that you can be saved by water, blood, or desire. Like that. That's like, and that's not what Christ said. It's nowhere. It's whoever's been baptized into Christ has put on Christ, not whoever's been baptized, martyred, or desires baptism has put on Christ. Like that, it's not there. It's not there. And so he said we have to reinterpret the scriptures to understand that they mean baptism of blood. And again, all the stuff, there's so many problems with saying all that. Yeah, if everyone followed what the church teaches alone, then we would have a lot less schism and heresy. Yep. If most people believe, yeah, no, I know, Rosary. I didn't even see it for a hot minute there, but like then it dawned on me. towards the end, I'm like, he keeps appealing to the majority. Like, the Catholic Church is not an appeal to majority. If the Pope defines something, it's defined. It doesn't matter if anybody agrees with it or not. It's a hierarchical monarchy. So the Pope is the king, so to speak, and doesn't matter if anybody else agrees with it or not. And this king, the Pope, has a direct access to define things infallibly by the Holy Ghost. So then it's God defining the truth through him. So it doesn't matter if everybody else doubts it or disagrees with it or has a bunch of stuff to say about it. They can write whatever they want about it, but if they're not agreeing with it, then they're the ones that are wrong. We don't have to redefine the dogma. Let's see. A lot of good questions. Whoever's been here, thank you so much. Like Rosary, Joan, St. Anthony, like all these people, Your Excellency, Peter. I think Peter is RZ apologist. So thanks for joining RZ. I'm pretty sure that's you. Yeah, it was like a semi-debate. RZ, we started out with what we agreed on, and then we got into what we don't agree on. Let's see. Oh, we're getting into a music dispute. Oh no. Well, good. Thanks, RZ. That was big of you. Does this guy claim to be Catholic? JM85. Yes, he does. Early Christian beliefs. We'll put his channel in the description when the video's done. Let's see. Ian claims to be a Sedevacantist too, RZ. Unless this isn't, or no, this is RZ. Yeah, because you were talking to Rosary. Good discussion on music. When he professes the true faith and desires baptism, I think that's in response to me saying, when does he become a member of the church? Yeah, so then St. Anthony Padua, that would mean, like, again, the pagan on the island, if he's told about the faith by inspiration or an angel, then as soon as he desires baptism and professes the faith, now he's a member of the church. And again, how is he a member? He's not a visible member. Nobody can see that, you know. And if claiming to profess the faith doesn't by itself make you a visible member, because Bergoglio claims to profess the faith, and we know he's not a member. So obviously he'd have to be consistent with the dogmas, but then there's no visible thing that has happened to him to bring him into church membership on baptism of desire. And baptism of blood, the martyrdom is visible, but that's not a means for entering the church. Martyrdom is not a gateway to church membership. So all the arguments from silence is, if you want me to believe that, I'm going to need you guys to prove all these claims. You can't just say they're all compatible. Where does anyone in the church teach that martyrdom is a gateway for church membership, that it makes you a member? Where do they even get into any of that? And it's, well, I know baptism's the gateway, the one gateway, but it somehow will just say there's three, but it's not three. When he's martyred, he's already in the church. So again, he's in the church before he's martyred. Oh, so what brings him into the church? When he desires to be in the church? Then why are catechumens outside the church then? Catechumens all desire to be in the church. Why were they excluded from the Mass of the Faithful if they're members of the church? Because they're not full members? Like, is this Vatican II stuff where it's like they're partial members? They're like in the soul but not the body? Or, the Catholic Church subsists in the mystical body, so they're in the mystical body but not the church. Now you're separating those two. Like, how are they in the church? In what way is someone who is in the process of being martyred in the church if they've never been baptized? It doesn't work. Saying that some of the fathers talked about it doesn't prove the point at all. Holy innocence, yep, that was before baptism, so that is not relevant to babies today supposedly having it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a total straw man to argue that it's impossible for God to save without water baptism. That's not the claim. The claim is, what is the divine revelation? Did Jesus Christ reveal that we all must be baptized in water, or did he not? If he didn't, then we don't need it. If he did, then everybody needs it because he has ordained it that way, not because he couldn't have done otherwise. And it's the same question in reverse. Are you saying it's impossible for God to get somebody water baptized? No, of course not, because God can do anything. Okay, then that's not relevant. That sword cuts both ways. It's not impossible for God to get everybody water baptized. And if he had ordained otherwise, he could have saved us without baptism. So he could have done either of those. But which one did he reveal? Did he come to the apostles and tell them, unless you're born again of water and the Holy Ghost, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, unless there's some people who I will let in without the water because I'm going to let them die martyrs, or I think their desire alone, I'll take their desire in place of it. Is that what he revealed? Don't think so. Yeah, JMN85, he wouldn't say Jesus was wrong in John 3:5. We have to understand what it really means. What it really means is you don't need to be born again of water. And when St. Paul said, as many of you are baptized into Christ have put on Christ, what that actually means is some people who are not baptized have put on Christ. So it's the same stuff we saw in the Deuterocomical debate. It has to be that way because there's no other way they can try to argue this. The words of Christ are very clear, and people have to reinterpret them. They have to add things to them or take things away from them because it's too much. Why doesn't Ian act according to what is positively taught? Why does he have to say, well, that doesn't mean they excluded? Well, honestly, Rosary, to me, this is a defense mechanism because they can't win this argument. They know they can't. That's why anytime we got into actual specifics, like from Trent or anything, it's like, well, no, I know that's a good question. I don't have an answer. It's like, because there's no way around that there's only one instrumental cause. That's the bottom line. That's all Trent revealed. That's all. And Trent only said that because that's all Christ revealed. There's only the one way. And for some reason, people don't want it. And it's like, well, but, some people didn't write about it. So, but the other people did, and nobody said they were wrong. It's like, is that a requirement? Does anybody have to specifically say that's wrong? Why isn't it positively taught by the magisterium? So if we're going to have an argument from silence, why haven't the popes defined it in 2,000 years? Why has it never been defined? Either one of them. So Ian can say, well, how come nobody condemned it for 2,000 years? How come it was never defined for 2,000 years? How come all your arguments are what theologians and fathers' private opinions are, instead of being able to definitively show that the magisterium teaches it? Again, that argument from silence should be more compelling. The definitive teaching of St. Peter doesn't teach it. And you want to say, well, Trent taught it. Well, how could Trent have taught it, but that's not a definition? Why don't any of them cite that as a definition? Because it's not a definition, because they know it's not. The Session 6, Chapter 4 part, it's not defining, but even if it was teaching baptism of desire, it's not defining it. So we still would have no idea how it works, when it works, how it's compatible with the other dogmas. Like, we wouldn't get any of that. So they don't have a definition, and they know it. So why isn't there one if that's been the teaching? Especially the baptism of blood. It's been handed down from Christ. Okay, then where is the definition? from the chair of Peter. That's an argument from silence. So that one is more compelling. Let's see. That's a big rosary in the back. Yeah, thanks, RC. Yes, all right, I got to that one. Good. RZ, you're funny. That's not a nice question, RZ. Come on. Question for Ian. All right, we'll put it out there. If the Council of Trent taught that one can be saved without the sacrament and with desire only, can't we also say one can be saved without the desire but with the sacrament only? Yes, and you've asked that of Deutero. I'm sorry I didn't get to that before he had to go, because that would have been a good question. Yes, it would have logic would require that if that statement is an either or, then you could do either or. You can walk up to adults, baptize them against their will, and now voila, they're a Catholic who has sanctifying grace. Doesn't work that way. And he admitted it could be both anyway. So he knows it's not definitive. He already admitted it's not definitive. He said the reading of it being you need desire and the sacrament could be valid. It's like, right. So then Trent doesn't define baptism of desire if you could read it either way. It's, so it doesn't work. They don't have anything. It's all it comes down to is this human incredulity, this human respect and incredulity of, well, these fathers can't be wrong. It's like, well, pause. Like, let's really flesh out if that works. Between themselves, they reject baptism of desire, and some accept it and some don't. And Augustine retracts his stuff on the good thief. So like they're not in any way unanimous or consistent about baptism of blood or desire. And you can't say that because someone didn't write about either one, we can just assume they believed it. All of this is proving this with no evidence. It's proving it with no positive teaching. It's like, well, if someone didn't talk about it, we can assume they believed it. And I don't know if Ian actually said that, but it's like, we can't assume that they believed it if we don't have any evidence that they wrote about it. What if they didn't believe it? We don't have evidence one way or the other. And then if someone did seem to accept it or did accept it, does that prove the point? Does that prove that it is the definitive teaching of the church? Because some of the fathers accepted baptism of blood or said it could supply, or again, some of the cases, they're not even saying that. They're talking about people who already were baptized, or they're using a euphemism for martyrdom. So it doesn't prove the point. What is in front of me is actually not in front of me. Yeah, I know, Rosary. It's sad. That's why I said it's kind of like gaslighting. Again, St. Peter Canisius, there's no remission of sins without faith in baptism. That actually means that there is remission of sins without baptism because they have desire for baptism. So again, having the desire for baptism is somehow the same as being baptized. Just like having the desire to be a woman is the same as being a woman. Having the desire to be married is the same as actually being married. Having the desire for holy orders is exactly the same as having holy orders. It's like it's not. The desire is not the thing. This is so fundamental and elementary, and it is scary to me that people just can't accept that. Like the desire for the thing is not the thing itself. So it's just, but that's what they think. That's what they think. It's very relativistic and Talmudic. Your Excellency, thank you so much for watching. Mr. Gwynn, do you believe Jesus is God? He would say yes. Do you believe he cannot deceive or be deceived? I think he would say yes. I'm answering on his behalf, but he can correct me if I'm wrong. Do you believe the Holy Ghost is God? I would think he would say yes. Our faith is based on this one dogma. It is. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. God is simple. Faith is simple. You're making it way too complicated. I totally agree. Completely agree. Again, I've said this. If you are not like a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. That's also what Christ said. So does that really mean that, well, you don't, some people have to be like a child, but that's the ordinary way. But the extraordinary way is you don't have to be like a child. So if we can believe Christ at this point, when he said you have to be like a child can understand that everyone needs to be baptized. That's very simple. A child cannot understand that blood and martyrdom and desire and all this is like somehow the same, but not really the same. And it saves you, but it's not a sacrament. And I know that like you're a member, but you aren't really like a formal member. And I know Jesus said this, but we really have to understand that it really means all three of these things. It's like that again, and you're going to explain that to a new catechumen. You don't really need baptism. Like, yes, like we kind of say you need it because that's what Jesus said, but like really he'll save you without it. You know, if you're in a pickle and a jam, it's like that's not what he said, and that's not what the church believed. That's not what the popes taught. Pope Leo said there's one remedy in any danger, one singular remedy, and it's the sacrament. It's just it is sad. I feel for people. Theological inquiry, yeah, fallacy after fallacy. Theological inquiry leads to a dogmatic definition, which can only be proclaimed by the Supreme Pontiff using the keys authority. Yes. Oh, get past a few there. Oh wow, yeah, there's some more stuff. Let's see. The brothers are okay. Yeah, we won't make it about that. Yeah, I'll pray for you too, RZ. They very well could be. So, I mean, it's like I'm kind of chuckling, but it's really not funny. I always appreciate your simplicity in teaching, your excellency. Yes, I agree, Rosary. Bishop Tetherow has a very simple way of teaching the faith, and I mean that in the most positive way for simple, because we need it. I mean, you can see from this discussion, there's so much confusion. We need pastors and clergy like Bishop Tetherow who are going to keep it simple, especially today. Oh, good. I'm glad you guys are going to talk, Joan. By the way, BOB and BOD puts the act of salvation on the man acting, not God. Yes, I agree, Your Excellency. We talked about that because baptism is the gift that Christ gave to us. He gives it to us. We don't earn baptism. But my martyrdom or my desire, being the instruments, is me sort of appropriating it. It's like I'm not passing through the way that Christ ordained. I'm kind of bypassing it and doing my own thing, making my own sacrifice of my life, or really desiring to have it. And it's like, I can really desire whatever. It doesn't give it to me. I have to go obtain the thing. Like this is very basic. Very basic. I don't understand. Are you and Luke meeting at some point? Yeah, I know Luke's still working on it, RZ, if you're still here. You did a wonderful job with Ian. I just hope his heart will ponder. Yeah, I thank you, Joan. I hope he does too. And again, you've heard his story. He came out of the New Age and Anglicanism, so he's been on a journey. And God does this a lot where people are in stuff that's really far out, like the New Age, and then usually those people don't instantly jump from New Age to total traditional Catholicism. They usually have a progression, And so he could still be on the progression, like, because this is what happens. You kind of have these questions and salvation, but then what's weird is he's like, it doesn't really matter though. Like, this is kind of a not an important topic. I'm like, well, then why is it a big deal? Why are people treating it like it's a big deal? Why are we talking about it if it doesn't really matter? Because it clearly does matter, because people get really worked up about it. And for any version of it, like whether they think it only applies to catechumens or only martyrdom and no desire, anytime you depart from baptism and you tell people they need water baptism and everybody needs it, there's a reaction from them. It's usually not, and Ian was pretty cordial, but it's not usually like, oh yeah, no, that's no big deal. It's like, no, like they usually get like, no, this is you think people need it? Like, yeah, I think they need it because that's what Jesus Christ said. They're always, well, no, because what about this? They have 1,000 objections. And that line of doubt that I said at the beginning, that's what we kind of saw here, is Ian's line of demarcation is catechumens desiring it. He thinks that's okay. But someone in ignorance, God isn't going to save them. Like, that's the line for him. Other people go past that and say ignorance, and then people say atheism, and so that line is all subjective. If you leave water baptism, it's totally subjective, which is why he kept saying what I think, in my opinion, me, according to me, as far as I can tell. It's like, that's why, because it's ultimately his opinion. He draws the line at catechumens who have the faith. Everybody else outside of that's damned. But that's not where Christ drew the line. Christ drew the line at actually receiving water baptism. So anything past that or not in line with what Christ taught, it's your own opinion. It's just them saying it. And again, St. Augustine said it's his opinion for BOD. And so did St. Bernard. So it was their opinions, theological opinions. It's not the truth. It's not the teaching of Christ. It's because it's oh, hello, my wife, my darling wife. It's because it's repackaged Protestant faith alone. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because St. Bernard actually called baptism a desire of faith alone. And a lot of them don't know that, but he said it was his opinion that he could be wrong about, and that he only accepted it because of Augustine and Ambrose. And he said, but then I admit that if I could be wrong, that faith alone can save you. And that's an interesting way of wording it. Now, he was before Luther by about 300 some years, so he wasn't doing Luther's Protestant faith alone. But I mean, what else would baptism of desire be like? Especially if it's happening more like at death, like Ian was describing. He's not describing someone like a catechumen. It's like, well, he's not a Catholic. He hasn't been admitted to the sacraments. He's not admitted to the Mass of the Faithful. Like, he's not Catholic yet. He's not in the church. Everyone teaches that. So if we're talking about the positive teaching, all the theologians teach the catechumens are not inside the church. They're outside the church. Even Ludwig Ott teaches that in Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, which was like in the 40s. So tons of modernism by the time you get to the 40s. And even he admits that the fathers are unanimous that catechumens are not members of the church. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of the church. They're not inside the church. So how is this person who is not in the church, not a member, not under the jurisdiction of the church, how are they becoming one? Well, just by their desire. I'm like, okay, so then why doesn't it happen earlier? And St. Anthony Padua Radtrad said it happens when they desire baptism and profess the faith. Well, all the catechumens desire baptism. What catechumen doesn't desire baptism? Maybe some of them don't. Maybe they're there for the wrong reasons, but one can imagine that most of the catechumens, like, they're there to become Catholics. So they desire it and they're professing the faith, so they would be members. But all the theologians and fathers teach that they're not members. And we would never know if they were a member. Like, according to this belief, they could be a member before they die. And we don't know. We have no way of knowing. Like, and how early does it happen before they die? If it's what St. Anthony Padua Radtrad said, then it would happen way before they died. They're a member, so then when they're baptized, they're not even becoming a member when they get water baptized. They're already a member. The baptism with water then is just letting us know that they're a member, but they've already been a member for a while. It's like that. All of this, that's why it's so confusing and disjointed. It makes God disjointed and like semi-schizophrenic. Like nothing is linked. They are pulling all this stuff apart. With water baptism, everything is neatly joined together. You are not a member of Christ. You're baptized. Now you're a member of Christ. Very simple, easy to understand. Easy, we can all see it. It's a visible sign. It affects the grace. Makes total sense. But the BOD stuff, it's like, well, when is he a member? Well, when he professes the faith and desires baptism. Well, that's all catechumens. It's basically all catechumens. So they're already members. So then when they get baptized, it's not the baptism, the water baptism then is not even making them a member. They're already a member. It's just letting us know that they're members. It's like an epistemological thing. It's just so we can know. But they already were. We just didn't know. You know, and again, when in the martyrdom, because it has to be before he dies. He can't be a member after he dies. So at what point during his martyrdom is he a member? Is it when he resolves to be a martyr? Or does he have to be actually physically being tortured at that point? Does he have to actually be like in the very process of breathing his last breath? Like when is the martyr becoming a member? And why? And again, it's always it's an unbaptized catechumen who dies a martyr. So he's a catechumen. He desires the faith. He's already been desiring the faith because that's why he's a catechumen. And he desires baptism because that's the end goal of the catechumenate. So why does it even have to get to the point of martyrdom for him to be a member? He's already a member. So none of this makes sense. It's all inconsistent. Cannot be reconciled with any of the dogmas. But yes, it reminds me of St. Alphonsus taught that God could have redeemed us through an angel, but he chose right. Yeah, what God could have done is he could have done whatever he wanted, but he didn't. He chose to use the means of water baptism to save us. If there's really 7 of you still watching, that's amazing. We've been going for a long time. I'm trying to get to the bottom of these questions, then I'll go. Isn't Cantate Domino a very clear rejection of BOB? Yes, it is, Enrique. And welcome to the channel. I don't know if I haven't seen you interact before. Welcome. Even if he has shed blood for the name of Christ, can be saved unless he has remained in the bosom and unity of the church. Yes. Which is why I think Ian's arguing that the unbaptized catechumen who's dying a martyr, he is actually a member. He's persevering in the bosom and unity of the church, despite never having been baptized. And so if we're going to talk about positive teaching, where on earth is the positive church teaching for that? That an unbaptized catechumen is inside the church because he desires to be or because he's going to die a martyr. And then why are all these theologians telling us the fathers are unanimous that catechumens are not members? Why aren't they admitted to the mysteries if they're members? So now they're also admitting that you could be a member of the church and yet the church can deny you access to the sacraments, which also makes no sense. Another question we didn't get to for Ian is why couldn't the catechumen, if let's say they had no water, right? But they're being attacked, they're being besieged, and this guy knows he has sins, he has mortal sins, and he hasn't been baptized. Why couldn't he just confess to the priest if the priest is with him, even though he hasn't been baptized? Because if his desire for baptism or desire for martyrdom is going to wash away his sins anyway, and it makes him a member, then he's a member of the church already. So why couldn't he go to the priest then for sacramental confession? Why is he not permitted to do that? Because he's already a member. But no, the church is exactly the opposite. If you haven't been water baptized, he can't go to confession. Can't receive any other sacrament without water baptism. Why? If the church teaching really is that they are members by desire or members because they're going to be martyred or members during their martyrdom, then in theory, they could receive absolution. You say, well, the martyr doesn't need absolution. Okay, the baptism of desire person might need absolution. Why couldn't they call the priest at that point? And the priest could just absolve them. He doesn't need to baptize them. No, of course not. He's going to baptize them because he can't hear their confession if they're not baptized, because they're not under the jurisdiction of the church. Yes, some people would argue BOB places you inside the church. Yes, that's exactly what he said. And of course, my beautiful wife, we know from our Catholic faith, we are not a soul and a body. We are a body and soul. Yes, I should remember to say this to him. Good, this is why I need you. So in the same way, we must address both parts of who we are as human beings, the whole of us. The whole of us needs redemption, needs to be born anew, not just our soul, which is a Protestant heresy of faith alone. Yep. Yep. And again, St. Irenaeus actually said that the water is to regenerate the body and the Holy Ghost regenerates the soul. So yes, and Luke and I have talked about this too in the past, that the BOD stuff, it's a weird kind of like Neoplatonism or rejection of the body, like the Manichaeans. It's like the physical world doesn't need to be redeemed, is really what it kind of gets down to. None of them argue positively for that. They don't say it that way, but that's what it amounts to. It's like, well, your body needs cleansed just like your soul. But the whole BOD thing is it's a spiritual regeneration. But your body's not getting regenerated. Well, no, your body is, but through just a spiritual means. I'm like, right, that's faith alone. Just it makes you righteous. You're saved, but not regenerated. So it is faith alone, sadly. Curse of Adam's original sin affects not just our souls, but also all of creation, our bodies as well. Yep. Everything needs to be freed from the curse. God in his wisdom knew this and took care of it all for us in the sacrament of baptism. Yep. Pretty easy to do too. I mean, it's a very simple sacrament to have validity. So God is good. The reason why they are so off-put about only water baptism is because of the reality that few are saved, and then all the people they know are or will be lost unless they convert. Yeah, sadly, Joan, I think that is what it is for a lot of people. It's highlighted pretty perfectly now here with Bergoglio saying he hopes hell is empty. And I've asked a lot of people online now, do you also hope hell is empty? And now they're just saying, yeah, I hope it's empty. And I'm like, so what about when Jesus said that it's not empty? Like when he said in Matthew 7 that wide is the way and broad is the path that leads to destruction, and many there are that go therein. But again, if Jesus Christ didn't mean what he said in John 3:5, then he also didn't mean what he said in Matthew 7:13. So this is the problem. If we can, Bishop Tetherow always sums it down to this point about you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. He can neither deceive nor be deceived. So if we can doubt what he said in John 3:5, we can doubt what he said in Matthew 7. Maybe the path to heaven is actually wider. Maybe it's not as narrow as Christ told us. Maybe many people don't actually go to eternal destruction. And this is all based on our fallible human reasoning and not being ready and willing to just accept what Christ said. So yeah, you're right, Joan. Thank you for all your effort. Oh, thank you, Enrique. Yeah, and again, if you've already been a subscriber here, I don't know if I've seen you interact before, so forgive me if you have, but welcome to the channel. And thank you, whoever's here, for sticking with me. I will sign out in just a minute, but I think I'm almost to the bottom. I think many have this corrupt view of God because of the lack of fathers truly imitating the fatherly love of Christ. We often view God how our earthly father. Yes, Rosary. Yeah. And that really, to me, that's really the main reason why the devil works so hard to destroy the family unit. because children get their image of Christ from their father, because the husband represents Christ. That's the whole point of marriage. The man represents Christ and the woman represents the church. And so if you have a bad mom, then you have a bad view of the church because the mother represents the church. And if you have a bad father, you have a bad image of God the Father, the Trinity, Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, because you don't know how to relate to a loving father. You don't know how to relate to God. And I think especially in the last 100 years with the destruction we've seen of the family unit, with the sexual revolution, feminism, no-fault divorce, the birth control pill, just it's been just a horrific onslaught towards the family. And most people, I agree, they, myself included, it's so hard to relate the way we need to relate to God because of the upbringing. It was such a modernist, relativistic upbringing for the last 100 years of the world for most people, especially in the West. Very materialistic, very full of scientism, and just whatever floats your boat, that kind of stuff. And it made fathers, they abandoned their duty. And we saw it because a lot of the clergy abandoned their duty at Vatican II. And well before that, because Vatican II didn't happen in a vacuum. A lot of the priests and bishops, they neglected the simple true faith. They wanted it more complicated. They wanted the worldliness. And then at Vatican II, a lot of them betrayed our Lord. And they sold out the lay people. And then the laity wanted it. A lot of them, they wanted their birth control. They wanted their, their no-fault divorce. They wanted their, ability to not necessarily prioritize, mass on Sunday. And they wanted the business success of the Protestants and the Jews. And our civilization was sold down the river. It's really sad, but it starts with baptism. Like, if you don't think people need baptism, it's only a matter of time before you don't think they have to believe in Jesus. If they don't have to believe in Jesus, they don't have to follow the natural law or the moral law. They don't need to, follow the 10 Commandments. If they don't have to follow the 10 Commandments, then, we don't even have a society anymore at that point. You can't even have a civilization without the moral law. So I agree. How can we understand God's fatherly love when we never experience that love? Yep. Fathers play a crucial role. They do. I pray I can do a good job. Joan, well said. That's what I'm going through now. Yeah. Yep. They want to make guys like boy. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're right, RZ. Pray for your thorough healing. Yep. Think of how St. Joseph would have loved you if you were his daughter, then try to apply that to God. Yeah, that's a great point. Wow. My wife's coming in hot here at the end. I can't imagine being raised by St. Joseph. It's on. And then you, again, it's like that. Then he's a man. What if you were what if you were raised by God the Father, by Christ? Can't relate to that. Can't understand it. Imagine if the Blessed Mother was your mother. Obviously, she couldn't have neither children. That wasn't her mission. But just imagine, even someone like Saint Anne, like the Blessed Mother's mother. Imagine that she was your mother. Imagine that, like, Saint Monica was your mother. Imagine that your father was, I don't know. Now that I think about it, I don't know as many like lay male saints off the top of my head. They're all priests and monks, but just imagine if your father was Saint Joseph, like how different you would see God. So anyone who has children who can still influence them, try to take this to heart and apply that. We're a little off topic now, but that's fine. This is my channel. At least imagine, right? Teresa of Lisieux. St. Teresa's father was so affectionate and selfless. Him and his wife had such marital harmony as well. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what most of us have no clue what that would be like. St. Anne holding baby Jesus. Yeah. I know. Like, imagine that. Like, she was Jesus's grandmother. She got to hold him as a little baby, At least I think so. I don't think she was dead. I don't remember for a fact though her timeline. I think she was alive. But yeah, if there's no more questions, it's been a long time. I think we started at 6. So we'll say goodnight. But everyone who watches, especially my wife, Bishop Tetherow, Rosary of Roses, Joan, RZ, Enrique, you were here. It's nice to meet you on here. Everybody who watched, I really appreciate it. These are always interesting discussions, but we need to keep it simple, especially in this time period. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, and to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So he has revealed we must be born again of water. That's our mission. We have to tell that to everybody, and we have to baptize the people who, need baptized. The rest of it is complicated and opinions and theories, and we don't need any of that. The church has defined what we need. The instrumental cause is baptism. There's no remission of sins outside the church. There is no salvation outside the church. You're only in the church if you've been baptized. All of that stuff it all fits together so perfectly and so neatly. Everyone who's in the church is a visible member because we've all been baptized. So all of that fits together. The mystical body is the church, right? The church is the mystical body. It all fits together. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. That's the divine revelation. It's our job to stay there, preserve our souls, and repent if we have mortal sin, and stay in the mystical body through our baptism. And the rest of it, we pray for people like Ian to come to the truth, because I know he knows he has issues with his position. I know he knows he can't answer, these big questions. And it's not because he hasn't done enough research. It's because they're not answerable. If you don't accept that men need water baptism, they will never be answerable. There will always be objections and doubts, and it'll never be enough. And it ultimately comes down to Christ is God. He told us what to do. If we're a Catholic, we accept that. If we're not, then according to Pope Leo, we're not a Catholic, because if we reject even one divinely revealed truth, we cast off all faith. Satis cognitum from Pope Leo XIII. So with that, I bid everybody good night. Thank you so much for watching Living Echoes. I hope this was helpful. I think it's always good to kind of stretch these intellectual muscles and potentially convert people. Somebody could watch this, even if it's only one person who watches this and comes to the truth, then it was worth it. Whether that's Ian or somebody else who I don't even know who happens to see the video online, that's the goal. That's the point of doing Living Echoes, is to pass on the faith of the fathers, the real faith of the fathers and the popes, the church, Christ, the scriptures, and to help people get to heaven, including myself and my friends. So appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone. And I'll come out. I'll put his channel in the description if anybody wants to go check Ian's stuff out. And I'll see everybody again next time. Have a good night.